Chapter 1 Gifted Girl, Abandoned 1. Chapter 1 Gifted Girl, Abandoned 1. The Junwu Empire, the imperial capital. Both Zhuqinyun and Fengwu were only 8 years old. FFFT. The tip of the cold, purple sword in Zhuqinyun's hand stabbed into Fengwu's forehead right between her eyebrows. When the sword was pulled free, it drew out a suspended drop of amber true phoenix blood from Fengwu. With a grasping movement of her left hand, Zhuqinyun drew the drop of amber blood into her palm, and poof! The droplet exploded with a squeeze of her hand. Despite the blood that covered her hand, Zhuqinyun smiled strangely. She smirked at the girl on the ground, whose body had curled up in agony. Fengwu, only one person in this world can possess true phoenix blood. Since I'm already here, you should never have existed. I never wanted to be mentioned alongside you as the phoenix duo of the imperial capital. What right do you have to be considered my equal? So what if you were betrothed before I was? I'm going to become the wife of the crown prince and Jun Linyuan will be my husband. I can't believe that you were chosen by the master of Firmament Palace. Well, you're useless now, and I'm the only candidate for the goddess of Firmament Palace. So die. The cold purple blade stabbed at Fengwu's heart. Fengwu grabbed the blade with both hands and blood gushed out of the deep cuts on her palms, but she seemed to feel no pain. Spiritual essence was dissipating from the spot between her eyebrows and her cultivation was disappearing even then. She was becoming an invalid now that her true phoenix blood had been destroyed. Fengwu stared at Zhuqinyun with her inky black eyes. Die. With a sudden exertion of strength, Zhuqinyun pushed the blade into Fengwu's chest. With a thump, the blade pierced through Fengwu's body and red blood splashed all over Zhuqinyun's face. The smile on Zhuqinyun's face looked grotesque under all that blood. From now on, I will be known as Zhuqinyuan. Qingluan, as in green luan bird and red phoenix, and the king of all birds. I will be the only true phoenix of the Junwu Empire. Collapsing on the ground, Fengwu's vision began to blur. She watched as the leader of the Zhou family escorted Zhuqinyun away, and realized that her mind was slipping away. She was running out of time. Zhuqinyun, you took advantage of today when my beautiful master was refining his true form to destroy my true phoenix blood. After my master comes out of his seclusion, can you, your family and your clan, or even the entire Junwu continent, be able to withstand his rage? Her master wasn't human. More specifically, he was a soul attached to his dragon and phoenix spiritual ring. It was said that one's fate was determined by the family one was born into, and a competent father was one's most valuable asset. Fengwu would proudly announce that although she had never met her own father, she had the most remarkable and beautiful master in the entire continent. She still remembered the day she triggered the spiritual ring for the first time and saw her beautiful master stroll out of that dimension inside the ring. Being a girl of only 3, she looked up at the otherworldly teenager dressed in white and asked innocently, "Well, are you very capable?" Putting his hands behind his back, her beautiful master said casually, "I'm all right, I guess, since I used to rule this land." In the last few years, her beautiful master, who had been in his spiritual form all this time, had finally accumulated enough divine blood of the phoenix of his own, and was ready to refine a true physical form. That way, he would no longer be confined to the spiritual ring as a soul. Was it a dying illusion? Fengwu's eyes grew heavier, but she seemed to see her beautiful master, dressed in a snowy white gown, now standing there slim and graceful as a god. White immortal flowers drifted down, reminding her of pure, sacred snowflakes. He strolled out of the dragon and phoenix spiritual ring and was carried toward her by a gentle breeze. Before Fengwu realized it, she was lying in his warm arms. He had the cleanest smell in the world, which was the refreshing scent of the essence of plant. Master, Fengwu broke into tears after seeing her family. Her voice was thick with emotion. Her master could hold her now. He finally had a physical form. His long-awaited dream had come true. Her beautiful master's long robe and wide sleeves spread out over the ground as his brooding gaze landed on the wound between her eyebrows. He didn't seem disturbed at all. "Master, am I going to die?" The little girl's eyes were as clear as water. Her master replied unhurriedly, "No, you're not." After that, he gestured with his slender finger, and immediately, a drop of golden blood flew out from between his eyebrows. Feng Wu's pupils contracted. That was divine blood of the phoenix. Her master's divine blood of the phoenix, whose power exceeded that of true phoenix blood many times over. Her master's voice was indifferent and detached. "Don't squirm." He then inserted the drop of blood into her forehead. "No." Feng Wu had an ominous feeling. "Master, I'm not going to die, but what about you? Divine blood of the phoenix is the essence of your life. Without it, your body." The look in her master's eyes was indecipherable. "Divine blood of the phoenix will be sealed for the time being. Once the 9 transformation spirit restoration pill is activated, you'll be able to resume your cultivation." Before he could finish the sentence, his body began to fade away. "No!" Covered in blood, Feng Wu screamed at the top of her lungs. Blue veins popped on her skin and she reached out, trying to hold her beautiful master. "Master!" However, her beautiful master, who looked as sacred as a banished immortal, disappeared from between her fingers. "Master!" Exhausted, Feng Wu fell to her knees. Her red dress was soaked in blood, her fair cheeks were stained red, and she felt like crying blood too. It was so painful that she couldn't breathe. Every one of her muscles twitched in such agony. Guilt almost drove her to take her own life. She hadn't even felt this much hatred when Zhuo Qingyun destroyed her true phoenix blood. She would rather die herself than have her impeccable, beautiful master harmed. There was so much hatred. Feng Wu clenched her fists furiously, her nails nearly cutting into her skin and all her fingertips raw with blood. "Zhuo Qingyun, I hereby swear that I will destroy you one day. I, Feng Wu, will not rest until you're wiped off the face of the earth." Chapter 2 Gifted Girl, Abandoned 2. Chapter 2 Gifted Girl, Abandoned 2. 5 years later, the Junwu Empire, northern border city. "Master!" Feng Wu shrieked and bolted up in bed. Miss, are you all right?" Qiuling, her chief maid-in-waiting, rushed into the room. After setting down a copper basin filled with water on the shelf, she went up to Feng Wu in a hurry. Qiuling always considered her mistress, the 5th daughter of the family, to be an exceptional beauty. However, she now saw that the young lady was as white as a sheet. Qiuling's heart went out to her mistress. In a comforting, gentle voice, she asked, "Miss, did you have a nightmare?" Staring at Qiuling, Feng Wu gradually woke up, and everything slowly came back to her. Zhuo Qingyun had destroyed her true phoenix blood, and in saving her, her master had fallen back into an endless coma. All that wasn't a dream at all. It really happened 5 years ago. After her true phoenix blood was destroyed, the once gifted teenage girl fell into disgrace, and became the shame of the Feng clan. Together with her beautiful mother and her own brother, they were packed up and banished to the old Feng family residence in northern border city, which sat on the border of the empire. Qiuling fetched a pair of fluffy slippers for Feng Wu, then helped her sit down at the dresser and began to dress her for the day. Sister, we got a letter from the imperial capital." They heard some hasty footsteps, and shortly afterward, a teenage boy dashed into the room like a gust of wind. He was about 12 years old and very good-looking. He had skin as fair as snow and exquisite features, especially his eyes. His eyelashes were long, dense, and curly, and his eyes were remarkably big and bright. Before Feng Wu could ask anything, Feng Xiaoqi stuffed a letter into her hand. "Sister, read it now." It was a red envelope, which stood for a red alert. No wonder he was in such a hurry. Despite Feng Xiaoqi's anxious tone, Feng Wu remained as calm as ever. She unfolded the letter with slender fingers as fair as white jade and quickly read it through. Sister! Feng Xiaoqi stared at Feng Wu with unblinking eyes. Seeing her slight frown, he grew all the more uneasy. Has something happened in the imperial capital? Was there an incident? Qiuling looked equally curious and anxious. Feng Wu waved the letter and smiled. It's nothing. Jun Linyuan is coming here on an inspection tour of the border cities. Qiuling cried out in surprise, Our crown prince, the most influential and supreme figure in the empire, is coming out here. Feng Wu nodded. We can avoid him easily enough. However, our family has been trying to regain favor with the crown prince, and I'm afraid this means that they're now going to send someone here from the clan. What are we going to do? Feng Xiaoqi almost jumped into the air. We've been banished to this old house on the border already. What more do they want? To kill us all? Feng Wu darted an irritated look at Feng Xiaoqi. Calm down. Feng Xiaoqi was so anxious that he was almost in tears. Sister, how can I be calm? If you were still what you were, we wouldn't give a damn who comes here. You'd be able to handle them with a wave of your hand. But now all your cultivation has been destroyed. Young master! The look Qiuling gave him had never been so stern. Feng Xiaoqi realized that he had said the wrong thing. Covering his mouth with both hands, his eyes opened wide and he looked at Feng Wu guiltily, not knowing how to take it back. Feng Wu only smiled. So what if it's destroyed? Can't your sister find a way to resume her cultivation? Feng Xiaoqi's eyes lit up immediately. Sister, can you do that? Have you found a way? Feng Wu shrugged. No, I haven't. Feng Xiaoqi looked crestfallen right away. When no one else was looking, the look in Feng Wu's eyes turned brooding. Her beautiful master had told her that in order to resume her cultivation, she had to refine the 9 transformation spirit restoration pill first. She knew the pill recipe and was capable of refining it. However, she still needed one last ingredient: immortal spiritual fruit. Feng Wu had had her eye on this immortal spiritual fruit for 5 years, and it was almost ripe. Meanwhile, Feng Wu was perfectly aware that the oldest child and the 6th child of her generation in the Feng family were coming. When those 2 arrogant bastards arrived, her beautiful mother and naive younger brother would live in misery without her protection. Hence, she needed to obtain that immortal spiritual fruit as soon as possible to resume her cultivation. Feng Wu clenched her fists. Jun Linyuan, are you really here just to inspect Northern Border City? Chapter 3: A Meeting in Yunlai Tower. Chapter 3: A Meeting in Yunlai Tower. Northern Border City, Yunlai Tower. Yunlai Tower was the closest restaurant to Frozen Forest. Cultivators coming in and out of that forest would often stop by Yunlai Tower to rest. Hence, the restaurant never ran short of customers and its business was booming. Normally, the customers mainly consisted of men, but today, for some unknown reason, the restaurant was occupied by pretty young ladies. For today's event, Feng Wu had covered her unparalleled beautiful face with yellow face powder. She now looked like an inconspicuous common girl, and even her splendid aura had been mostly dimmed. Qiuling was also wearing a disguise, and had turned into an unprepossessing little maid. Feng Wu and Qiuling had barely sat down when they heard the conversation beside them. Is His Royal Highness really coming to Northern Border City? I have reliable information that His Royal Highness has already arrived at Northern Border City. I paid a small fortune for that info, so keep it to yourself. I'll finally get to see His Royal Highness's graceful bearing. This is the gifted teenager ranked top on the greatest of our generation list we're talking about here. One look at him up close and I'll be content for the rest of my life. Feng Wu listened in silence. Qiuling pursed her lips, venting her sarcasm inside her head. How green and inexperienced these girls were. They were content just to have one look at the crown prince? Her mistress had been betrothed to the man once. Why, there's an empty seat. Do you mind if I sit here? A pleasant voice rang out next to Feng Wu. Looking up, Feng Wu saw a pair of smart, clear eyes. Feng Wu soon? Right away, Feng Wu recognized the teenager, who had the appearance of an outstanding cultivator. She remembered fighting this one back in the imperial capital, but with the disguise she was wearing and the fact that they hadn't met for 5 years, it was only normal for Feng Sun not to recognize her. If she remembered correctly, Feng Sun was Jun Linyuan's childhood friend, and the two teenagers were best buddies. Feng Sun's folding fan opened with a flick of his wrist to cover most of his face. He then smiled at Feng Wu. "You're welcome to ignore me. Sit here without interacting? That wouldn't do." Feng Wu rejected that suggestion in her head. She had come here to gather information, in order to find out if Jun Linyuan was here for that immortal spiritual fruit. It was by sheer luck that she had run into Feng Sun, and she wasn't going to let this opportunity slip by. Feng Wu pondered, trying to figure out a way to get the information from Feng Sun without raising an alarm. Feng Sun loved noise and excitement. He couldn't stop his eyes from darting around the restaurant. All of a sudden, he poked Feng Wu with his fan and asked, "Do you know who that is?" Feng Wu followed the direction he was pointing his fan in, and saw a young lady wearing a curtained hat. She could faintly make out the shape of her face through the white veil. "Who is she?" "That's Fairy Miao." Feng Sun smiled. Feng Wu was mildly surprised. "As in Fairy Miao, the sacred lady of Firmament Palace. You're looking at her?" Feng Sun arched his eyebrows, pleased with himself. Did she really think she could fool me with that curtained hat? Nothing escapes my sharp eyes. Was the sacred lady of Firmament Palace pursuing the crown prince in secret now? Feng Wu hadn't expected Jun Linyuan to be so popular now. The room was filled with the sound of non-stop discussion. "Hey, have you heard? The fifth daughter of the Feng family, who was banished by her clan 5 years ago, is said to have been living in this city since then." "Are you talking about Feng Wu?" a voice interjected. "Who else? Speaking of which, that name really gets on my nerves. She's rather brazen to be using that name still. Why didn't she change it? Does that name imply something? You don't know." Chapter 4: The Girl Who Soars Like the Phoenix. Chapter 4: The Girl Who Soars Like the Phoenix. Know what? His name means, the sovereign descends to the world, and hers, the phoenix, soars above the land one. Their names alone suggest that they're made for each other. We could live with that back when Feng Wu was this genius teenage girl, but she's a good-for-nothing now. She doesn't deserve that matching name with our crown prince. These people. Qiuling was so furious that she was going to shoot up from her seat. Feng Wu stopped her in time, then gestured at Feng Sun with her eyes. Qiuling pouted, looking aggrieved. She was almost in tears. How could her mistress's name offend these people? What they said was so awful. Across the table, Feng Sun's mouth curled into a smile. The sovereign descends to the world? The phoenix soars above the land? Good God! If that guy finds out that his name is mentioned together with Feng Wu's, TSK, Tisk. Before Feng Wu could even frown at that comment, the crowd stirred all of a sudden. Wait, isn't that young Prince Feng? As in the younger prince of Northern Feng Mansion? His Royal Highness's childhood friend. Oh God, he's the closest friend of the Crown Prince. Touching him would be like touching the Crown Prince indirectly. I've never been this close to His Royal Highness in my life. My prince! A group of young women rushed toward the table Feng Wu was sitting at. To avoid getting crushed, Feng Wu tugged at Qiuling and the two of them moved away to one side. Seeing the surging tide of women coming his way, Feng Sun's face almost turned green. If nothing else, he was at least the younger son of Northern Feng Mansion, which should be a title intimidating enough on its own, but whenever his name was mentioned, everyone's first reaction was, the childhood friend and footman of His Royal Highness. Some people were just more popular than others. Feng soon leapt up onto a high window, and was about to take flight when the ground shook violently. Everyone lost their footing. Everything flew into the air, and everyone was bumping into each other. Mixed into all the thumping and crashing sounds were the screams of people. It all happened too suddenly for anyone to react in time. Everyone was utterly dumbfounded. However, it was just the beginning. The next moment, a streak of fire crashed into the restaurant, and with a whoosh, it spread out, setting everything aflame. Oh God! What's this? What's happening? It's Giant Flaming Cloud Eagle. Holy crap! Giant Flaming Cloud Eagle, the ruler of the eastern region of Frozen Forest. Shit! Is the eagle out to ravage our land again? I heard it devoured an entire village only a while ago. Is that Giant Flaming Cloud Eagle that terrifying? The next second, Yunlai Tower, the restaurant that had stood there for years, made crumbling sounds, as if it was going to collapse the next moment. The owner of Yunlai Tower blanched. Yunlai Tower is collapsing. Run! Feng Wu cried out. Whoosh! 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 Everyone inside immediately rushed out of the restaurant. Feng Wu looked up at the sky. High above, she could make out the enormous giant flaming cloud eagle flapping its wings, which were wide enough to cover mountains, and it dove at them in a frenzy. Giant Flaming Cloud Eagle has gone wild. It's come out of Frozen Forest to ruin our land again. What now? What should we do? Are we going to die? I'm only here to get closer to Jun Linyuan. I don't want to die here. All the girls were terrified. They looked wretched and as pitiful as fragile flowers ravaged by a storm. We're not going to die. Feng Wu's eyes were as sharp as ever. One look and she saw that the eagle was being pursued. But no one would listen to her. However, a second later. Chapter 5: The Teenage Ruler. Chapter 5: The Teenage Ruler. A teenager wrapped in a black robe swept across the sky like a meteor as he dashed in their direction at a tremendous speed. He was very far away at first, but within a split second, he was right in front of them. He had a stern, forbidding look on his face and his eyes were as brooding as they were apathetic. His black robe flapped in the wind and he reminded one of a celestial being descending to this world. He then brought down the resplendent sword in his hands, creating a splendid arc in the air. The light which came off the sword had a momentum as tremendous as an erupting volcano, and a formidable power of nature burst out. Everyone down on the ground was shaken by the towering sword energy. The overbearing strength of the powerful teenager made them stiffen and hold their breaths, not daring to make a sound. The black-robed teenager crashed into the eagle like a thunderbolt. The collision created sky-high flames. The clouds echoed with rumbles and the entire sky shook with it. With a loud bang, the enormous body of Giant Flaming Cloud Eagle plummeted from the sky and crashed onto the roof of Yunlai Tower. The age-old building collapsed under the eagle's weight and crumbled loudly to the ground. The air was filled with dust and flames leapt into the sky. All mouths fell open and everyone was rendered speechless. Wasn't that Giant Flaming Cloud Eagle supposed to be really powerful? Weren't they told that no one was able to tame this savage beast? Hadn't the head of the Qiushui family fled Frozen Forest in a flurry, pursued by this bird? Who was this teenager? Who on earth was this peerless, talented young man in black? Once the smoke and flames dispersed, they saw a youth of great radiance pointing his sword at the eagle's throat, 1 foot on its head. The eagle that was so rampant a moment ago was barely breathing. Everyone then saw the teenager's face. His black robe flapped in the wind, wrapping around his deft, slender figure. He looked poised and graceful. He had deep-set, sculpted features and sharp, ruthless eyes that had something dangerous about them. His aura was so intimidating that no one dared move closer or look directly into his eyes. Everyone drew in their breath. Oh my God! Holy crap! Good gracious! Instantly, all the pretty girls lost control. Some trembled, some cried into their hands, and some even passed out. However, at the same moment that giant eagle was raving furiously. Face and head are off limits in a fight. Keep your feet away from my head. June Linyuan smirked, then stepped on its head again. Giant flaming cloud eagle said angrily, "Can't you hear me? Don't step on my head. I'm the boss of the giant eagle clan, for Christ's sake." June Linyuan snorted, then stepped on it a few more times. The eagle was almost in tears. Seeing that playing tough didn't work, it yielded, imploring with a wail, "Dude, please let me go. You've chopped off half of my skull. If you keep stepping on my head, I'll die." June Linyuan sneered. By now, all the girls in the crowd had been driven mad by their stunning crown prince. June Linyuan. It's June Linyuan. June Linyuan, our crown prince. Gosh. Oh God. I thought I was going to die here today, but His Royal Highness saved my life. I was taught to return a favor with all I can offer. He saved me, so I'm going to repay him with my own body. After that, the bold, passionate young woman threw herself at June Linyuan. No one expected that at all. Even someone as haughty and detached as June Linyuan was taken by surprise. Shit! Feng Wu noticed giant flaming cloud eagle's eyes at that moment. In an instant, its inky black eyes turned scarlet red. The animal was going berserk. How cunning! The weakness it had shown a moment ago was all fake. Feng Wu feared nothing more than death. Before she realized it, she had backed away and turned to flee. However, at that moment, Chapter 6 Taken by the Eagle. Chapter 6 Taken by the Eagle. Giant flaming cloud eagle exploded with a roar, shaking heaven and earth. It went berserk. Just when all eyes were on that bold, passionate girl who pounced on June Linyuan. Giant flaming cloud eagle flapped its wings and picked Feng Wu out of the crowd. Feng Wu was dumbfounded. Holy crap! She swore she was going to have a heart attack. She had been taken by giant flaming cloud eagle. Feng Wu was dazed for a moment. She began to pound on the eagle's chest when she came back to herself. "Put me down. Now. Why are you doing this to me?" The eagle sneered. "He stepped on my head and I'm taking his woman." Feng Wu knew perfectly well who the bird meant by he, which was what frustrated her the most. "I'm not. You all are," the eagle said stubbornly as it remained unmoved, its eyes flickering fiercely. Feng Wu said in resignation, "Fine, let's say I am. In that sea of women down there, why did you have to grab me? Why on earth should she be the most unlucky one?" The eagle smirked. "Those women are all nuts. They terrify me. You look like a lamb." Feng Wu almost choked. "Screw you." So, she seemed vulnerable because she wasn't pulling her hair out and throwing herself at June Linyuan like the others? What kind of reasoning was that? June Linyuan had been genuinely astonished by the fanatical girl, but he was only dazed for a brief moment. The next second, he raised Sky Destroyer, his sword, and charged at the eagle like a cannonball. Holding Feng Wu up by her throat and using her as a shield, giant flaming cloud eagle threatened June Linyuan. "You! Stop right there. Come any closer and she's dead." Feng Wu really wanted to die at that moment. "Are you kidding me?" June Linyuan was callous and heartless, and couldn't care less whether other people lived or died. Why on earth did the bird think he would be intimidated? "Hey! Did you hear me? I told you not to come any closer." The eagle kept falling back. June Linyuan smirked. From the start, he hadn't even darted a glance in Feng Wu's direction, as if she was just one of the eagle's feathers. Seeing that things were turning south for itself, the eagle panicked. The next second, it flapped its wings that covered half the sky and bolted. "No!" Feng Wu cried out in despair. With her between its beak, giant flaming cloud eagle fled. It flew away. Feng Wu's vision blurred, her stomach churned, and she could feel the biting cold wind scrape over her cheeks. Looking down, she realized that she was rising higher and higher. Everyone on the ground looked as tiny as ants. It finally occurred to her that she was hanging in the fangs of giant flaming cloud eagle and dangling in the wind. Feng Wu wanted to slap the bird. How dare it kidnap her? Giant flaming cloud eagle lowered its gaze and realized that the girl was still around, which pissed it off right away. What was this burden here for? It took Feng Wu in its claws and was going to throw her down. Feng Wu held onto its talon. What do you think you're doing? Falling from this height would kill her. Giant flaming cloud eagle glared at Feng Wu impatiently. You're useless and a terrible hostage. Are you good at anything at all? Feng Wu drew in her breath and fought back her anger. So, are you saying it's my fault? The eagle snorted. I've never met a hostage as hopeless as you. What good are you? Feng Wu listened in silence. I am not talking to you. Chapter 7 Frustrated. Chapter 7 Frustrated. Looking down, Feng Wu saw Qiuling hopping around anxiously and calling her name loudly. At this height, she was able to see much farther out. On the state highway a short distance away, she could make out a team of riders galloping toward the city. Her eyes widened when she saw the familiar figure on one of the horses. The rider leading the team was Feng Yiran, the eldest son of the Feng family. Immediately behind him was Feng Lu, his younger sister who shared the same parents. The rest of the team consisted of the guards of the Feng family. Feng Yiran and Feng Lu. Neither of them was the type one wanted to hang out with. The brother was a sinister hypocrite and the sister was obstinate and capricious. At the thought of her beautiful mother, whose only forte was crying, and her naive younger brother, who was as innocent as a blank canvas, Feng Wu almost had a stroke. What would happen to them now that the eagle had taken her away? With her gone, how were they supposed to deal with the cunning Feng Yiran and the unruly Feng Lu? Meanwhile, those on the ground were utterly baffled as they watched the eagle fly away with the ordinary-looking girl. So was Feng Sun. He said a silent prayer for that common girl. What were the odds? She was the first to warn everyone and the first to flee, but the eagle picked no one else but her. Talk about bad luck. He would be crying blood by now if he were the girl. Seeing that Qiuling was about to faint with anxiety, Feng Sun patted her slim shoulder and said, Lassie, judging by the look of your mistress, her being a weakling and all, I think she's doomed and chances of her returning are very slim. You have my condolences. By the way, if you really have nowhere to go, I could use an extra pair of hands at home, in return for sharing a table with me just then. Go away. Qiuling stomped her foot. My mistress is awesome and she's never been defeated by anything. She'll come back safe and sound. The other girls were all scared out of their wit. Patting their chests, they were still in a state of shock as they rejoiced over the fact that they weren't the ones taken. Just then, Jun Linyuan turned around and went after giant flaming cloud eagle. Gosh, look. His Royal Highness is going after the eagle. How I envy that ordinary-looking girl. I wish the eagle took me. That way, I'd be able to see the Crown Prince up close. It's not just seeing His Royal Highness up close, but also being rescued by him. Talk about saving a damsel in distress. It would be a perfect opportunity to offer myself. That's so true. Why didn't the eagle take me? What was up with that girl? Why did she have to run at the front? I would so have been the one taken if she hadn't. I bet she did it on purpose. She doesn't have the looks, so she made up for it with her scheme. She so planned it. Qiuling shook with fury. These women, all these women, they would give up their lives just to see the Crown Prince? Seriously? Feng Sun rubbed his nose. After hanging out with Jun Linyuan all these years, he was already quite used to the reckless plans of all these women. Ignore them. Feng soon darted a sympathetic look at Qiuling. Now, since your mistress was unbelievably unlucky, I'll go into frozen forest myself and see if I can get her out. He disappeared into the distance immediately after those words. Right now, Feng Wu was dangling in the wind from one of the eagle's talons like a tiny piece of sun-dried meat. She was so frustrated. Chapter 8 Lost the Best Chance to Escape. Chapter 8 Lost the Best Chance to Escape. Giant flaming cloud eagle's enormous body flew rapidly across the sky on wings that were wider than clouds. At this height, the temperature had dropped significantly. Together with the freezing wind that lashed at Feng Wu like whips, she was almost in tears. However, in another life, she used to be an elite secret agent. Hence, the more dangerous the situation was, the calmer Feng Wu became. Her mind raced and she looked around to take in her surroundings. Looking for the best possible way to survive in any situation had become an instinct for secret agents like her. Soon, her eyes flickered at a discovery. She spotted a branch sticking out of a cliff which they were flying toward. Calculating in her head, she estimated the wind and the eagle's speeds, the distance she would fall to get to the cliff, and the strength of that branch. The conclusion elated Feng Wu. She could do it. She was going to live. 500 meters. 100 meters. 50 meters. Almost there. Feng Wu was almost grinning now. She couldn't wait to start maneuvering. They were getting closer and closer. The last 30 meters, 20 meters. When Feng Wu was ready to loosen her grip so that she could jump toward the cliff, roll down the slope, and grab that branch. Whoosh! Something happened 1 second before Feng Wu could let go. Bang! The energy surge from a sword arrived behind them. Because of that freezing energy, Feng Wu was stuck to the eagle's talon. Feng Wu! She was less than 50 meters above the ground now. With her slight build and her skills, she was completely confident that she could land safely. But she wasn't able to do that now. She was rendered completely immobile by the energy and her hands were stuck to the eagle's talon as if they were glued on. Feng Wu was so frustrated. Such a chance would never come again. She would probably never be this close to the ground again, and that could have been her only chance. At that thought, Feng Wu exerted all her strength, trying to free her hands. When that was to no avail, Feng Wu did a chin-up and banged her head against the thick layer of ice on the talon. Thump! 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 Giant flaming cloud eagle looked down in confusion at Feng Wu, who was still banging her head against the ice. What are you doing? Feng Wu glared at it and snapped, I'm going to kill myself. Happy? Of course she wasn't going to share her escape plan with the eagle. It would be the end of her. Well, you don't have to go through all that trouble, said the eagle calmly. Its gaze gave Feng Wu the creeps. What are you doing? I'm starving. The bird was drooling. Feng Wu said in resignation. So, you took me as food reserve? Giant flaming cloud eagle's eyes lit up. That's a great idea. Just then, Feng Wu sensed that the thick layer of ice was loosening up. She was noticeably delighted. She was going to be free. Triumphantly, she called out, There goes your food reserve. She released its talon and was ready to fall. However, at that most critical moment, Giant flaming cloud eagle made its move. No! Feng Wu felt utterly defeated. She had finally freed her hands from the thick layer of ice, but Giant flaming cloud eagle turned its enormous body around. And she lost the best chance to escape. Chapter 9 The Clash. Chapter 9 The Clash. Giant flaming cloud eagle's furious, bloody red eyes were now fixed on the human teenager in front of it. Thanks to the eagle, Feng Wu met Jun Linyuan again. He had the most impeccably handsome face. His brooding black eyes, straight nose, thin lips, and debonair pose were the most stunning, making any natural wonder seem dull in comparison. However, the first thing anyone ever noticed about him were those brooding eyes. They were sharp as an eagle's, and the look in them was merciless, intimidating, overbearing, and majestic. Anyone bold enough to look into his eyes would be shaken, and would turn their gaze away. Right now, the handsome face had a stern, forbidding look on it, and his gown flapped in the wind. He stood there in midair, pointing his sword up at the sky. Energy surged out, stirring up the clouds. A shock wave then blasted out at giant flaming cloud eagle. Feng Wu's heart sank when she saw what was happening. With her spiritual energy gone, she would die if she was hit by that shock wave. A living person was hanging from one of the eagle's talons and dangling in the wind. Jun Linyuan, how can your Royal Highness miss that? However, when Jun Linyuan's freezing needles pierced the eagle's acupuncture points all over its body, Feng Wu realized in frustration that he could see perfectly. It was just that he was simply ignoring her, that was all. To him, she was probably less than a stranger. He was so heartless and almost inhuman. Bang! Jun Linyuan raised his hand and the most formidable spiritual energy poured out of it to run through Sky Destroyer like a storm. He then swung down. Feng Wu craned her neck, only to see that the lower half of the eagle's giant body was gone. Jun Linyuan had hacked it all off. Giant flaming cloud eagle roared in agony, which kicked up a massive sound wave. Hanging on its talon, Feng Wu was almost swept away by the blast. Her eardrums were nearly destroyed. All her internal organs felt out of place. Blood oozed out of her nostrils, ears, and mouth, and splattered all over her clothes. For a moment there, Feng Wu really thought she was going to die. Before she had a chance to recover her breath, the infuriated eagle clashed with Jun Linyuan again. The battle was so fierce that the sky seemed to be shattered by the force. Feng Wu felt as if she was on the bumpiest plane ride as she was tossed around like a sack of sand. Thump, thump, thump. That wasn't from the collision between Jun Linyuan and the eagle, but was made by Feng Wu's dangling body knocking into the eagle's face. She was sure that all her bones were breaking. However tough and determined she usually was, Feng Wu really felt like crying at that moment. Not from pain, but because of her bad luck. And it actually got worse. Putting the sword back in its sheath, Jun Linyuan now looked as cold as he did murderous. Boom! He struck out with a fist, which contained the most formidable spiritual energy. It made a great indent in giant flaming cloud eagle's mountainous wings. The impact took a heavy toll on Feng Wu. Her hands were long bruised from holding onto the eagle, and were raw and bloody. She could no longer hold on and plummeted. Ah! Feng Wu cried out in her head. Beneath her was a misty, bottomless chasm, and she would shatter into 1,000 pieces from the fall. But she didn't want to die. Feng Wu's head remained clear as ever thanks to her secret agent instinct. Bang! The moment she began to fall, Feng Wu reached out and grabbed the eagle's feathers. Chapter 10. What good can you do me? Chapter 10. What good can you do me? Once giant flaming cloud eagle went berserk, it spread out its vast wings, covering half the sky. Even the mountains beneath were in its shadow, that was how enormous the bird was. Glossy and slippery, its feathers were more like armor than a layer of down. Feng Wu's fingers closed on empty air and she fell rapidly. She was in dire danger. Her life was hanging in the balance. At the most critical moment, she finally grabbed hold of the eagle's sharp talon. The claw was as sharp as a blade, which cut deep into Feng Wu's palms. Blood gushed out. That had to be painful as hell. However, Feng Wu didn't even flinch. With the momentum, she swung herself up deftly and climbed back onto the eagle's talon. Only then did she let out a breath of relief. She had narrowly escaped death. If she had been a tenth of a second slower, she would be dead now. At that thought, Feng Wu turned her sharp gaze to Jun Linyuan. Was everyone else an ant to that crown prince? He was so poised and elegant, while she was in such a sorry state. Fury burned in Feng Wu's chest like flames. Strength! She had never craved strength like she did now. Feng Wu took a deep breath. Immortal spiritual fruit, that was what she had to get her hands on now. Only after she refined the 9 transformation spirit restoration pill could she resume her cultivation. There was still a long way for her to go. Jun Linyuan, let's wait and see. At the moment, the most important thing was to stay alive. Giant flaming cloud eagle-eyed Jun Linyuan in terror. How could this teenager be so formidable? He was still so young, but his abilities already exceeded that of a demi-emperor. Giant flaming cloud eagle was no match for the teenager even after going berserk. When this teenager reached his full potential in a few years, would that mighty being which dwelled in the middle of frozen forest be threatened by this human as well? At that thought, a look of despair flickered in the eagle's eyes. However, if it couldn't escape, it would make sure to fight to the end. Seeing the frantic look in the eagle's eyes, Feng Wu's heart sank. She couldn't care less about the eagle's fate, but if both sides went at each other's throats, she would certainly become collateral damage and she wouldn't get out of this alive. It wasn't that she didn't want to beg Jun Linyuan for help, but she knew perfectly well that there was no point asking. Because right now, to Jun Linyuan, she was a complete stranger. The man had always been unbelievably heartless. The motto he lived by was, "Save yourself or stop wasting your breath." To him, there were 2 kinds of people in this world, his people and everyone else. He would stand up for his people no matter what and ignore the rest. Clearly, Feng Sun was his man, while Feng Wu belonged to the other category. As frustrating and infuriating as that sounded, it was the fact. Hence, Feng Wu pinned her hopes of survival on the eagle. Feng Wu looked down again. Frozen Forest was divided into 5 concentric circles, and the most formidable ruler of the forest lived in the very center. It was a place that intimidated even the most capable cultivators of the empire. Because of that crucial immortal spiritual fruit, Feng Wu had gained some in-depth understanding of Frozen Forest. One glance and she recognized that they were above the eastern region of the 4th ring. The next moment, the detailed map of this area came to her mind. If you fight him to the end, he will escape without a scratch, but you'll perish. How about we join forces? Despite the cuts on her hands, Feng Wu grasped the eagle's talon and nimbly moved toward the eagle's ear. Join hands? What good can you do me? Asked Giant Flaming Cloud Eagle with contempt. Chapter 11, You Piece of Birds Hit. Chapter 11, You Piece of Birds Hit. To Feng Wu, Giant Flaming Cloud Eagle's right ear was as big as a house. I don't have any spiritual energy, but I know what his weakness is. Feng Wu arched an eyebrow. All right. Giant Flaming Cloud Eagle lowered its voice. Get rid of him and I won't eat you. Feng Wu drew in a deep breath. Such was the pathetic life of one who didn't have any cultivation power. Fine. Sitting down in its ear, Feng Wu told the bird about Jun Linyuan's Achilles heel. Jun Linyuan is so talented that you'll never be his match. Trying to run away will be futile too. But there is one thing you can do that'll distract him briefly. Feng Wu smiled a little at that thought. He's a neat freak. She got the idea from the eagle's drool just then. Feng Wu turned to look at the teenager in black as she talked to the eagle. He had clenched his right hand into a fist and spiritual essence circled around it, warping the air around him. A formidable energy shook heaven and earth. Go! Feng Wu shouted, sitting in the eagle's ear. Giant Flaming Cloud Eagle had its doubts, but it still charged at Jun Linyuan, making this its last attempt. Just before they clashed, gurgle! A sticky white substance gushed out of the eagle's mouth and poured down toward Jun Linyuan. The look on the elegant, otherworldly teenager's face changed noticeably. His face turned livid. His movements turned stiff. He kept falling back, further back. Run! Feng Wu shouted, sitting cross-legged in the eagle's right ear. Giant flaming cloud eagle didn't expect it to work so well. It turned around and fled right away. The eagle spared no effort and increased its speed to the limit. In its right ear, Feng Wu kept giving it directions. "You're 10 o'clock, speed up. Quickly." Giant flaming cloud eagle hadn't thought much of Feng Wu at first, but since her suggestion had turned out remarkably useful, it began to follow her directions involuntarily. "Lower your height. Forward. Faster." Feng Wu clenched her fists. 10,000 meters, 5,000 meters, 3,000 meters. Almost there. They were almost at the waterfall over the cliff. At that moment, the eagle suddenly pulled Feng Wu out of its ear and held her in its talon. Feng Wu's stomach lurched as she saw its drooling beak. She cried out, "What are you doing?" The eagle then threw Feng Wu in the direction of its mouth. Just like someone throwing a peanut into their mouth. Feng Wu shuddered with fear. The eagle had gone back on its word before they were even out of danger. Infuriated, Feng Wu took out a most solid dark stone from her dragon and phoenix spiritual ring, then threw it out. Meanwhile, she turned swiftly, grabbed the eagle's beak, and jumped onto its forehead. Crack! There was a crisp sound. Giant flaming cloud eagle bit down on the dark stone Feng Wu tossed into its mouth, and almost cracked its teeth. It cried out angrily. The eagle ranted, "You heartless woman! You're so cunning!" Standing on its head, Feng Wu rested her hands on her waist and stomped her foot. "You're accusing me now? You promised you wouldn't eat me and you went back on your word almost right away. You piece of shit, no bird's hit." Chapter 12 Secret Agent Instinct. Chapter 12 Secret Agent Instinct. Giant flaming cloud eagle screamed furiously, "I'm only eating you because you're a smart person. Eating you will probably make me smarter, too. Do you think I'll enjoy eating you? You're all bones and might crack my teeth." Feng Wu took a deep breath. But her anger refused to subside. She snorted and said, "Fine, stay here and get killed by Jun Linyuan. I'm off." Feng Wu had long figured out her escape route and had chosen the spot she was going to take off from. She had started a row with the eagle as a distraction. At that moment, Feng Wu turned around and looked into the distance. The black-clad and black-eyed stern teenager now had a murderous look in his eyes. Tapping the tip of his foot in the air, he leapt up deftly, then charged at them across the sky. Sky Destroyer slashed down. The cold, merciless energy spread and tumbled out, aiming right for one of the giant eagle wings that was wide enough to cover mountains. Feng Wu knew that it was the end of this dumb, adorable-ish giant flaming cloud eagle. 500 meters. 300 meters. 100 meters. However, Feng Wu wasn't far away from that waterfall at the towering cliff now. After once again going through factors such as height, wind speed, and the speed of her fall, Feng Wu let out a breath, leapt out, did a forward somersault in the air, and hurtled toward the waterfall. When she fell past one of the eagle's eyes, Feng Wu even had the time to wave at it. The eagle was dazed for a brief second. Just as Feng Wu leapt out, Jun Linyuan had arrived with his slashing Sky Destroyer. A vast wing was cut right off the mountainous body of the eagle. Roar! Giant flaming cloud eagle's face twisted in pain and it screamed in a forlorn and bitter voice. Blood gushed out from where its right wing used to be and it trembled violently in mid-air. Jun Linyuan saw a figure jump out of the eagle's right ear and plummet. However, he never took any interest in those he deemed unimportant. He was about to look away when, out of the corner of his eye, he saw that figure nimbly wrap her arms around her bent knees and tuck her head in, curling into a ball. Then, she landed in the waterfall where the cliff ended at an angle, in a position to offset the impact. Immediately after that, she let the current carry her all the way down. She was washed into the bubbling small lake under the waterfall. An indecipherable look flickered in Jun Linyuan's eyes, which were usually nonchalant and emotionless. One could even detect a look of surprise on his handsome face. That person had jumped out of the eagle's ear, fallen, bumped into the edge of the cliff, and was then carried down by the current. Too many factors had to be taken into consideration during that process. The height, the speed and direction of the wind, gravity, the force of impact, the cliff angle, and the unpredictable giant flaming cloud eagle. Only one thing needed to go wrong for everything to fall apart. He never expected to see that from an ordinary girl with zero spiritual essence. Interesting. However, interesting was as much as Jun Linyuan thought of Feng Wu. He didn't intend to try and save her at all. If he knew that one day he would fall head over heels for the girl, Jun Linyuan, His Royal Highness, wouldn't have turned a blind eye to her now. However, that was exactly what he did to Feng Wu on this occasion. Feng Wu fell swiftly from the cliff, carried along by the rushing torrent. She then fell right into the deep small lake in the valley below. Bang! Feng Wu had calculated everything, apart from the fact that there was a giant rock at the bottom of the lake. Hence, she landed at the bottom of the lake and banged her forehead on the rock with a thump. Ouch! Chapter 13 Serendipity. Chapter 13 Serendipity. Rubbing her forehead, Feng Wu was almost in tears from the pain. However, it wasn't time to cry yet, for a dark, powerful whirlpool at the bottom was trying to suck her in. Feng Wu had just escaped death after much maneuvering. She wasn't going to be killed like this now. With whatever strength she had left, she struggled toward the surface. Finally, before she was drained of energy, she grabbed a withered branch on the surface and pulled herself up onto it. Once out of the water, she gasped for air and didn't want to even move a finger. Such a task would have been nothing for her old body, but now… Feng Wu smiled wryly. That series of events had worn her out. Luckily, despite her lack of spiritual essence, she still had her secret agent instinct, which was enough to keep her alive. Feng Wu lay on the floating branch and rested. Once she recovered some of her strength, she began to examine her surroundings. This was the eastern region of the fourth ring of frozen forest, an area that Feng Wu was quite familiar with. Back then, Feng Wu had gone in and out of frozen forest multiple times for that immortal spiritual fruit, as well as studied countless materials and maps. Hence, she knew that a short distance ahead of her was Great Frozen Canyon. Great Frozen Canyon was filled with a cold poison, which was more than her current body could handle. She had to get ashore first. At a bend in the river, Feng Wu found the opportunity she was looking for. Rolling nimbly off the branch and into the river, she swam to the riverbank. It still wasn't far from the waterfall, so the current was still very rapid. Moreover, Feng Wu was swimming across the flow, so she was almost carried away by the current more than once. Feng Wu finally managed to reach the bank before exhausting herself, though she was panting and pale now. She looked up and took in her surroundings. The ground was covered in colorful flowers and their fragrance filled the air. This place was… Feng Wu searched the map in her head and soon fixed on an area. She grew a little paler from the effort. She was in Bighorn Blood Wasp territory now. Someone up there must hate her to bring her to this place. Frozen Forest was riddled with danger, and this was the most dangerous area in all of the fourth ring. Feng Wu had seen with her own eyes how a team who had entered this area was turned into a pile of bones in less than a minute. It was so horrifying and gory. Bighorn blood wasps had a queen whom Feng Wu had been trying to get her hands on for the longest time, for it would shorten the time needed to refine the 9 transformation spirit restoration pill by half. However, Feng Wu shook her head involuntarily at the thought of swarming wasps. She would use the white jade bee queen instead. The bighorn blood wasp queen was more than she could chew. In order to stay out of the way of the terrifying bighorn blood wasps, Feng Wu decided to make herself as unnoticeable as possible and slip out of this area. In fact, that was exactly what she did. The buzzing of bighorn blood wasps came from a short distance away. Feng Wu hid behind a tree, then stuck her head out to watch. She spotted a figure wearing a red robe. What? There was someone here. And they were wearing red? That person had some balls. Grabbing the trunk, Feng Wu climbed to the top of the tree in a few jumps. From there, she looked down, and what she saw made her beam with delight. For she saw that the red-clad figure had lured most of the wasps away. Chapter 14 Frustrated Again. Chapter 14 Frustrated Again. It was a bigger and more pleasant surprise for Feng Wu when she saw that the hive of the bighorn blood wasps was within sight. Her long-gone hope was reignited instantly, and she burned with eagerness. The wasp queen was right there, defenseless. Feng Wu knew perfectly well that it was now or never. She would never run into such an opportunity again. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Feng Wu made up her mind there and then. She was going to have that wasp queen. Although this body was void of spiritual essence, Feng Wu was in great shape physically. Jumping from one branch to another like a slim civet, Feng Wu soon went round the hive. Feng Wu had been making knots with twigs as she went. Hence, when she reached the hive, she was holding something resembling a wooden stick with a hook on one end in her hand. What happened next was quicker than words could describe. She reached into the hive with the hook. The next second, an ear-splitting scream reverberated through the forest. It was the sound of the queen summoning her subjects. There was no time for Feng Wu to ponder. Tossing this wasp queen into her dragon and phoenix spiritual ring, she sprinted in another direction. Keeping highly focused and her breathing quiet, Feng Wu hunched her back and raced through the forest, making as little noise as possible. Almost there. She was almost out of bighorn blood wasp territory. Just when Feng Wu was going to let out a sigh of relief, an ostentatious voice came from behind. "Hey you, this is such a happy coincidence." That was a familiar voice. Feng Wu involuntarily turned to look, and recognized the guy right away. It was Feng Sun. The teenager had well-defined features and the fairest face. He always seemed to be in good spirits, and his breezy smile reminded one of the sun at noon, which could cheer anyone up right away. However, his presence brought no smile to Feng Wu's face this time. For behind Feng Sun was a swarm of bighorn blood wasps. There had to be tens of thousands of them, blocking out the light in the woods. The buzzing was coming from behind him. So, it was Feng Sun who had attracted the wasp's attention just then, after she had finally steered clear of the colony and furtively stolen their queen. Feng Sun had somehow brought the entire hive to her. They would recognize the smell of their queen on her. Feng Wu's face almost turned green at that thought. She pretended she didn't recognize Feng Sun, and kept dashing forward as fast as she could. "Don't come near. Don't come near. Stay away from me, dude." Feng Wu repeated those words in her head, hoping that somehow, Feng Sun could sense her desperation. Apparently, Feng Sun and her weren't on the same wavelength at all. With the swarming wasps chasing after him, Feng Sun ran toward Feng Wu, glowing with enthusiasm. "Hey, you're still up and running. I thought you'd be dead by now." Feng Wu made no comment. With what was happening, there was no way she was going to stick around. She took to her heels and scampered. Feng Sun called after her, "Hey, lassie, slow down. Wait for me." He even tried to grab Feng Wu as he shouted. Meanwhile, the swarm of bighorn blood wasps suddenly stirred and went into a frantic state. The wasps turned violently restless, and the buzzing grew louder. The wasps that had been chasing after Feng Sun now all turned toward Feng Wu with a domineering thirst for blood. The hair on Feng Wu's back stood up immediately. Shit. They must have found out about their stolen queen. She was doomed. Feng Wu glared at Feng Sun at that thought. Feng Sun was completely at a loss at her resentment. "What's wrong? Are your eyes not feeling well? Why are your eyelids twitching?" "Twitching? Punch you in the face," That's what I want to do at the moment. Feng Wu was utterly frustrated. Had it not been for Feng Sun, she would have gotten away with it already. Chapter 15 Let Go of Me. Chapter 15 Let Go of Me. Let go of me. Feng Sun had grabbed Feng Wu by the back of her collar, and she waved her hands around like a drowning person. There was a look of resignation on Feng Sun's handsome face. Why the rush, young lady? These wasps aren't idiots. They didn't once sting me after chasing me all this time. Feng Wu was crying inwardly. Of course they wouldn't sting you. That would get themselves killed as well. The problem now was that they had detected the smell unique to the queen on her after she had stolen the ladder. It was only natural that they would go berserk. Why, that's strange. Why are they all over you now and trying to sting you? Feng Sun found that very unusual. Feng Wu rolled her eyes. Seriously? You're only noticing that now? Ah! A wasp stung Feng Wu when she wasn't looking and she cried out in pain. Feng Sun smacked his forehead anxiously. Sorry, my bad. You'd be long gone if I didn't stop you. You're one of those people that attracts bighorn blood wasps more than others, aren't you? There was no way Feng Wu would tell him about stealing the queen, so she nodded repeatedly. Yes, you're so right. Feng Wu couldn't see herself, but she looked absolutely adorable, nodding her head innocently like that. Feng Sun chastised himself for her predicament. Picking Feng Wu up in one hand, he dashed out at lightning speed the next moment. When he put his mind to it, Feng Sun was able to reach unbelievable speed. They flitted past the trees like a flash of light. Feng Sun stopped about 5 minutes later and put Feng Wu down. There. The wasps won't be able to catch up with us. Don't worry, I promise you everything is alright now. Feng Wu couldn't help it as her gaze lingered a little longer on Feng Sun. She was surprised to see that Feng Sun had grown so much in 5 years. If her true phoenix blood hadn't been destroyed by Zhuqinyun 5 years ago, would she? Feng Wu stopped that train of thought right away and focused on changing the subject instead. Because she had been trying to find out Jun Linyuan's real purpose for entering Frozen Forest, she asked tentatively, "This forest is riddled with danger. We've narrowly escaped death once, so how about we leave now?" Her suggestion to retreat achieved the opposite effect, exactly as Feng Wu had planned. Feng Sun darted a bemused glance at Feng Wu. Leave? My buddies and I traveled thousands of miles to get here from the imperial capital. We won't leave until we get what we came for. Feng Wu's stomach lurched. She knew it. Forget about the inspection tour of the border cities. That was only an excuse given by the Crown Prince Jun Linyuan. His real destination had always been Frozen Forest. Gritting her teeth, Feng Wu feigned a curious and naive expression, asking gingerly, "You've come all the way from the imperial capital? What are you looking for here? I've seen some maps of Frozen Forest before. Maybe I know where the thing you're looking for is." Feng Sun laughed heartily at those words. "Gosh, young lady, you're hilarious. I promise you that you won't know where to find it. What we're looking for is the crown jewel of the forest." The crown jewel? Only a handful of treasures in the forest could be called that, and immortal spiritual fruit was one of them. Feng Wu suddenly had a very bad feeling about this. She was going to ask another question when a cold voice came from a few steps away. "Feng III, I see you're in no hurry at all." With those words, a teenager wearing a blue robe descended from above, holding a sword between his folded arms. He had deep-set features and his fluttering robe set off his slender body. He looked haughty and arrogant and there was no warmth in his eyes. Chapter 16 What was he thinking? Chapter 16 What was he thinking? It was especially the case with his eyes, which put one in mind of sharp, cold blades piercing one's flesh. His overpowering aura was second only to Jun Linyuan. "Why, Xian II, you're here?" Feng Sun patted the blue-robed teenager on his shoulder. Feng Wu grew up in the imperial capital. Although she had been away from the city for 5 years, these teenagers had all been over 10 years old when she left, so she was able to recognize this one right away. That was Xian Yi, the second son of the Xian family and one of Jun Linyuan's childhood friends, who had been a poker-faced kid since he was little. As it turned out, his haughtiness had only magnified with age. Xian Yi examined Feng Wu for a brief second with his sharp eyes, then knitted his straight eyebrows. "Who's she?" "She's this girl I just saved. By the way, what's your name?" "And this is—" Feng Sun was as warm and lively as he always was, but Xian Yi was none of that. "I'm Feng Xiaowu," that was all Feng Wu was able to say. Xian Yi raised a hand and stopped her abruptly in an indifferent tone. "I have no interest in her identity whatsoever. It's time. Let's go." Xian Yi was indeed as relentless as she remembered. Feng Wu expressed her amazement inwardly. Feng Sun glared at Xian Yi, snorted, then took Feng Wu's hand. "That guy and his temper, geez. Xiaowu, come with me." Xian Yi only walked 2 steps before he looked over his shoulder with a frown, his sharp gaze brushing over Feng Wu. Feng Wu could sense the animosity in Xian Yi's eyes, which was clearly telling her to scram. Feng Wu snorted inwardly. "As if I want to stay with you people." If Feng Sun hadn't dragged her all the way here, she would have left on her own already. At that thought, Feng Wu indignantly cupped her fists at Feng Sun. "Brother Feng, mountains cannot change and green rivers always flow, just like our friendship. I hereby bid you farewell and I'll see you when I see you." Feng Wu turned to leave after that. Feng Sun grabbed her by the wrist right away. "We're already so deep in frozen forest and you'll never get out alive, with you not having any spiritual essence and all. You're not going anywhere, you're staying with us." Xian Yi ignored Feng Sun, and only stared at Feng Wu with his cold eyes. "Are you leaving on your own, or shall I make you?" With that, he made it perfectly clear that he was getting rid of Feng Wu. "Your royal band is way too superior for someone like me." Feng Wu smirked. "Bye, Xian Yi." Feng Sun snapped, his eyes spitting flames of rage. "How can you be so cold-blooded? Xiaowu is no villain. She's only the most unlucky person I met today. She was collateral damage in Boss Jun's fight first, then got kidnapped by giant flaming cloud eagle. I put her in danger after that and she was almost stung to death by bighorn blood wasps. She's finally in safe hands now and you're shooing her away? Why should I care if she's a saint or a fiend?" Xian II stared at Feng Sun, his gaze so razor-sharp that he seemed to spit icicles from his eyes. "Have you forgotten what Boss Jun is like when he loses his temper? His Royal Highness was the most unfriendly guy on earth to strangers. Once his face darkened, he could easily scare anyone into not making a sound. Moreover, he drew a very strict line between his friends and the rest of the crowd." Feng Sun puffed out his cheeks and bit his lip. Xian Yi added, "Plus, we're on such an important mission here. What if she's a spy?" Feng Sun almost broke into an angry chuckle. "Do you seriously think a defenseless girl like her will rob us of the immortal spiritual fruit?" Feng III. Xian Yi was genuinely angry now. How could Feng Sun just reveal the immortal spiritual fruit so lightly? What was he even thinking? Chapter 17, You're Not Dead? Chapter 17, You're Not Dead. While Feng Sun thought of Feng Wu as one of their own, Xian Yi didn't. On the contrary, he made no effort to hide his disdain toward Feng Wu. Feng Wu couldn't care less about Xian Yi's enmity now. All she could think of was the immortal spiritual fruit, the fruit that was essential to her pill that could enable her to cultivate again. Feng Wu had been smirking inwardly before this, thinking, "I wouldn't follow you around even if you invited me to." However, she had changed her mind. With Jun Linyuan's intelligence and capability, together with the help of his friends, there was a 90% chance that he would obtain the fruit, if not 100%. If she walked off like this, she might miss her only chance of getting an immortal spiritual fruit in her lifetime. If that happened, she would remain this mediocre Feng Wu that was picked on and looked down upon. Would she succumb to that fate? Never. Hence, she had to stick around and act accordingly, grabbing that immortal spiritual fruit at the first opportunity possible. She wasn't leaving, no matter what anyone said. Fighting again. A graceful yet emotionless voice broke the awkwardness. Boss June. Feng Sun's eyes lit up as soon as he caught sight of the Tianger descending from the air. He hopped toward the ladder. Feng Wu turned to look involuntarily. The teenager had an impeccable face and an aura that was out of this world. He was so overpowering that wherever he went, he was in the spotlight. Everything else was cast in shade in comparison. Behind him stood an upright middle-aged steward with deep-set features. However, he was almost easy to overlook because of Jun Linyuan's presence. Feng Wu had no idea how long Jun Linyuan had been here or how much of their conversation he had heard. Feng Sun turned to Jun Linyuan eagerly. Boss Jun, Feng Xiaowu was thrown into frozen forest because of you and I brought her in deeper. She can't survive in or leave this forest on her own. How about we bring her along? Xian Yi smirked as he held his sword between his folded arms, knowing that Feng III was bound to be disappointed. Of all people, he should know what Boss Jun was like. The guy didn't even blink when other people died in front of him. It would be ridiculous to try stirring up any sympathy in this guy. Jun Linyuan darted Feng Wu an indifferent look. You're not dead. From jumping out of the eagle's ear to hitting the cliff, then falling into a deep lake, she had carried out this impossible task with such smooth movements that Jun Linyuan couldn't help but be impressed. Feng Wu drew in a breath. She was right. Jun Linyuan had seen her back there. He just didn't care if she lived or died. Feng Wu knew perfectly well that if she smirked now and retorted, "You seem to want to see me dead," Jun Linyuan would definitely reply in his cold voice, "Why should I care if you live or not?" Hence, it wasn't time to act impulsively now. For the sake of that fruit, she had to play docile when necessary. Feng Wu took a deep breath and forced a smile. Great misfortune will bring good fortune. I believe I'll be a very lucky person from now on. Jun Linyuan examined Feng Wu with his cold eyes and scanned her from head to toe. His brooding look reminded one of a sharp blade out of its sheath, which could give one goosebump. The longer Jun Linyuan remained silent, the more grim everyone felt. Xian Yi snorted. He knew it, Boss Jun would never let an outsider in on their plan. Just when Feng Sun thought all hope was gone, Jun Linyuan creased his nice, thick eyebrows and said to Feng Sun indifferently, "You brought her in. You keep her alive." Chapter 18 You Don't Have to Be So Nice to Me. Chapter 18 You Don't Have to Be So Nice to Me. Feng Sun almost jumped up. Boss Jun, did you mean it? I can bring her along. Really? OMG. I advise against it, said Jun Linyuan sincerely. Xian Yi, who had always been detached and nonchalant, opened his eyes wide. This wasn't right. How could Boss Jun possibly have agreed to this? It wasn't like him at all. He couldn't help but dart a look at Jun Linyuan. Of course I'm bringing her along. I'm going to look after the girl, said Feng Sun complacently. I'm Feng the third and she's Feng the fifth one. Who else is going to take care of her if not me? Jun Linyuan ignored the gloating Feng Sun and looked at Xian Yi instead. Xian Yi took the hint without any verbal instruction. I checked it out. That immortal spiritual fruit grows in Black Ice Valley, but we'll need to explore some more to find the specific location. Feng Wu's heart raced. Black Ice Valley. That was right. That was exactly where that immortal spiritual fruit was. Immortal spiritual fruit. Her immortal spiritual fruit. With it, she would be able to resume her cultivation and she wouldn't be a good-for-nothing anymore. On this continent where martial prowess was valued above everything else, one's capability meant everything. Feng Wu clenched her fists at that thought. Jun Linyuan nodded indifferently, then led the team out. To get to Black Ice Valley, they had to climb over Flaming Ridge first. They were moving at a rather fast pace. Creeks, bushes, mountain peaks, nothing could slow them down. Feng Sun would attend to Feng Wu on the way every now and then, asking, "Hey there. Are you sure you're all right?" Feng Wu was the only one in the team without any spiritual essence, and she struggled to keep up with her physical strength alone. Staring at Jun Linyuan and Xian Yi from the back, Feng Wu forced a sweet smile. "Of course I'm all right. Why shouldn't I be? I'm doing great." Seeing her pale countenance and the brave and optimistic tone she used so as not to be ditched, Feng Sun pitied the girl greatly. "How about I carry you on my back?" Before Feng Wu could say anything, Xian Yi turned around all of a sudden. "Leave now if you can't keep up. You'll be a burden on all of us." Staring at Feng Wu, Xian Yi said in a cold voice, "The magical creatures will only get more formidable as we go on. You won't be able to leave then even if you wanted to." Feng Sun glared at Xian Yi. "Xian II, I know you're telling the truth, but can't you be more subtle about it?" Feng Wu made no comment. Xian Yi snorted, quickly caught up with Jun Linyuan, and walked with the latter shoulder to shoulder. Seeing that Feng Wu had lowered her head, Feng Sun thought that the girl was hurt by those words. Rubbing her head, he said, "Don't mind him. That's just the way he is. Ignore him. I'm here for you, all right? Come, hop on my back." Feng Sun took pity on Feng Wu, given all her unfortunate encounters today, and before he knew it, he was looking after her. Feng Wu, on the other hand, couldn't care less about what Xian Yi said. So what if he was cold and his tongue was vicious? As long as she could get her hands on that immortal spiritual fruit and resume her cultivation, she could endure much worse things. At that thought, Feng Wu darted a guilty look at Feng Sun. The guy genuinely cared about her, but she had used that to join his team. She only hoped that what was to come wouldn't hurt this pure, kind teenager. Feng Wu shook her head, smiling wryly. "You don't have to be so nice to me. Dummy, who else am I supposed to be nice to? That stupid Xian II? Speaking of which, you really had an awful day today." Feng Sun rubbed Feng Wu's little head again. The team never stopped once for Feng Wu, and it was only when the moon was high above their heads that they made camp. Feng Wu's eyes lit up when she walked into the campsite. She saw. Chapter 19 Tough Girl. Chapter 19 Tough Girl. Feng Wu's eyes lit up when she took in the surroundings. Birds flew across the bright blue sky in flocks. The terrain was flatter here and the ground was carpeted by a vast tract of grass that was soft as a cushion. A thin creek flowed slowly through it. On the light green grass, an exquisite, soft woolen carpet had been laid out, which looked luxurious and elegant, and had a nomadic feel to it. A quaint wooden dining table had been set up on the carpet. Despite its simple and unsophisticated style, one could tell at first glance that it was made from very expensive material. Fine table mats and tableware had been set out at every seat. Porcelain plates as smooth as white jade, amber-colored tall glasses, and shiny, well-polished silverware were laid out. It wasn't difficult to tell that they were taken great care of on a daily basis. In the center of the meadow was an old tree with a trunk wide enough for 3 adults to join hands around. It grew straight up, and a thick branch reached out over the edge of the cliff. However, right on that branch was a small treehouse. From a distance, amidst the mist and fog, the treehouse looked like it was suspended in mid-air, which gave it a quaint yet mysterious look. Feng Wu was immediately taken. This wasn't camping. This was a resort in a remote forest on a mountain. Looking back at her experiences coming in and out of frozen forest, she had never once not scrambled around in the most sorry state. These guys, on the other hand, had turned it into the most enjoyable trip. Just then, a figure in a plain robe appeared from behind the old tree. Feng Wu shifted her gaze to the person. Wasn't that Feng Wan, the steward, who had been with Jun Linyuan, but disappeared halfway? Feng Sun was as cheerful and enthusiastic as ever, and raised a hand to greet the man. Feng, we're exhausted. Luckily you got here first to get everything ready, or we'd be all cold, wet, and hungry. Feng nodded at Feng Sun in a reserved and graceful manner. He then provided Jun Linyuan with a steaming hot white hand towel. Just then, Feng Sun noticed that Feng Wu was limping. He frowned and patted a chair next to him. Get over here! Feng Wu shook her head. The next second, Feng Sun had sat her down in the chair. Crouching down next to Feng Wu, Feng Sun prepared to take off her black calfskin boot. You're limping, you must be hurt. Take these off. Let me check your wounds. Feng Wu cried out as soon as he tried to pull off her boot. She was almost in tears. That hurt a lot. That looked very serious. Feng Sun stopped immediately and frowned. He then glared at Feng Wu and scolded her. Why didn't you say anything when you got hurt? You don't have to keep it to yourself. That looks so painful. Apparently, the soles of her feet were stuck to her boots with blood, and she couldn't take her boots off now that the blood had dried. Feng Wu darted a look at Jun Linyuan. She had used everything she had to join this team for that immortal spiritual fruit, and she wasn't going to be eliminated because she wasn't physically strong enough. Jun Linyuan turned his gaze on Feng Wu at the same moment and their eyes met. Feng Wu was anxious, but Jun Linyuan didn't even seem to see her. His gaze brushed past her like wind over water. Feng Wu's stomach lurched. He wouldn't kick her out now, would he? Hence, she stopped Feng Sun from attempting to remove her boot. I'm fine really. Don't worry about me. But how could Feng Sun turn a blind eye to Feng Wu? The girl had such bad luck, which had only gone from bad to worse since they met. How tough did she have to be to endure a wound like that? Chapter 20 She wished. Chapter 20 She wished. Hence, Feng Sun looked over his shoulder and called out, Feng, I need you here. Feng was the former general director in charge of palace affairs, who had been taking care of Jun Linyuan since the crown prince was little. He retired from his post after Jun Linyuan was born and had stayed by his side ever since. Therefore, Feng Sun and Jun Linyuan's other friends were also quite familiar with the steward. No one knew what Feng's cultivation level was, for no one had seen him in action. No one dared to mess with Feng, for those that tried were all dead. Feng arrived at an unhurried pace, bringing with him some hot water and ointment. Once the blood on the soles of her feet was dried off, her skin was stuck to the boots. Pulling her feet out by force would only tear her skin off. Feng Sun was going to cut the boots apart, but Feng Wu rejected that plan affirmatively. As a result, Feng Sun could only pour warm water into her boots first. He saw Feng Wu frown when the water went in. There. It'll be all right in a minute. If we leave the wounds untreated, you won't be able to walk at all tomorrow. Feng Sun comforted Feng Wu like a big brother. Once the boots were soaked, Feng Sun carefully, and with much difficulty, removed Feng Wu's feet, which were wrapped in strips of cloth, from the boots. It was so difficult because her feet were so swollen. Everyone blanched a little when they saw Feng Wu's feet. They were raw, bloody, and swollen. It was a ghastly sight. Feng Sun pitied her greatly. Xian Yi, on the other hand, frowned. She's never going to walk tomorrow. We should ditch her. How could the guy say such things? Feng Sun turned around and glared at Xian Yi. Xian the second. Yes. Put your right hand over your heart and tell me if you can find any conscience there. Xian Yi replied, I won't dignify that question with an answer. I'm going hunting. All this time, Apart from that look he gave Feng Wu and a frown, Jun Linyuan showed no extra emotion. Feng Sun attentively put on the ointment for Feng Wu, then ordered her to stay in the chair and go nowhere. Just then, Xian Yi came back with a crying elk, followed by a girl with a face as lovely as a deer. Fairy Muyao? Feng Sun cried out when he spotted the girl and glared at Xian Yi. Why did you bring her back? How could Feng Sun not recognize Fairy Muyao? Back in Yunlai Tower, Feng Sun had spotted her right away with his sharp eyes, despite the curtained hat she wore, which covered most of her face. Xian Yi took the elk to Feng, then darted Feng Sun a look. So, you're the only one here that can bring a girl back. Feng Sun almost choked at that. Gesturing at Xian Yi with a finger, he said, You! Get your ass here! Pulling Xian Yi off to somewhere quiet, Feng Sun whispered through his gritted teeth, Xian Yi, are you out of your mind? You do know what Fairy Muyao is like, don't you? She's in love with Boss Jun. Don't you know Boss Jun hates having a woman like that around? How can you do this? Xian Yi said in resignation, I nicked her hand accidentally when I was hunting that elk. Plus, she's my cousin from my mother's side. Feng Sun took a deep breath. You brought her in, she's your responsibility now. While Xian Yi and Feng Sun were absorbed in their secret conversation, Fairy Muyao had shifted her gaze to Feng Wu. Because of their previous encounter in Yunlai Tower, Fairy Muyao remembered Feng Wu clearly. She believed this ordinary-looking girl to be exceptionally scheming. She had pretended to be taken by giant flaming cloud eagle first so as to lure Jun Linyuan away to save her. That way, she would have a perfect excuse to stick with him. Did she think Jun Linyuan would treat her differently because of that? She wished. Chapter 21 Zhuo Qingluan? Chapter 21 Zhuo Qingluan. Fairy Muyao darted a look at Feng Wu with her limpid eyes, and she looked the latter up and down with undisguised contempt. There was no doubt that the fairy didn't like the girl. Jun Linyuan was cultivating in the log cabin, Feng, the steward, was busy preparing dinner, and Feng Sun and Xian Yi were engaged in their private conversation. No one was paying attention to the two girls. Hence, Fairy Muyao went up to Feng Wu at an unhurried pace and looked down at her with a condescending attitude. She then bent down and whispered into Feng Wu's ear scornfully, You are hideous. Preoccupied with her immortal spiritual fruit, Feng Wu was startled by Fairy Muyao's voice. She looked up at the fairy's pretty face and asked in bewilderment, Pardon me. What was that? Fairy Muyao smirked and whispered the provocation again. I said, You look hideous. It's not your fault that you were born this ugly, but it is when you flatter yourself. You're too ugly to even be Jun Linyuan's maid. Huh. Feng Wu didn't understand what Muyao was talking about at first. I see. A moment later, Feng Wu finally realized that Fairy Muyao had deemed her a scheming girl who thought too highly of herself. Feng Wu touched her face involuntarily. Before she left home today, Feng Wu had covered her stunning face with a sallow powder and altered the shape of her eyes and nose. Hence, to other people, she was just another ordinary girl out here. Muyao was furious at Feng Wu's reaction. She had made it clear already, and the ugly girl didn't even frown. Did she have a brain at all? Just then, Feng Sun approached them and asked, What are you two talking about? Did I hear something about someone being ugly or pretty? Seeing Feng Sun, Fairy Muyao's demeanor changed right away. A perfect, pretty smile instantly appeared on her comely face. Young Lord Feng, I was just talking about my beautiful senior sister. Feng Sun snorted, then sat down next to Feng Wu. Muyao looked up at that burlwood cabin and felt amorous desire well up inside her because of Jun Linyuan, who was less than 100 meters away from her. She tried to find something to say to get herself noticed by the Crown Prince. Hence, Fairy Muyao sat down on a chair and smiled at Feng Sun in a familiar way. Young Lord Feng, you still remember my senior sister, I presume? You mean Zhuo Qingyun? Feng Sun asked casually. Fairy Muyao waved her hands. My senior sister doesn't like that old name. She goes by Zhuo Qingluan now, as in Green Luan Bird and Red Phoenix, the king of all birds. None of them noticed that Feng Wu, whose mind had been wandering off as she sat there with her chin in her hands, frowned at those words and went a little stiff. Zhuo Qingluan? When was the last time someone had mentioned that name to her? Feng Sun seemed to be greatly interested in Zhuo Qingluan. He commented, That's quite a name. Is she as capable as the name suggests? Xian Yi also pulled up a chair and sat down at the table across from Fairy Muyao. Jun Linyuan came out of the log cabin at an unhurried pace at that moment. Feng, who had been waiting for him on one side, pulled up a chair for Jun Linyuan, then pushed the chair in for him when he sat down. Dinner was then served. Once Jun Linyuan arrived, he was all that Fairy Muyao could see. She kept her gaze on Jun Linyuan as if the young man had sucked her soul out of her. Ahem, Feng Sun cleared his throat. Only then did Fairy Muyao come back to herself as she blushed profusely. Embarrassed, she played with a lock of hair by her cheek and said, Where was I? I believe you were talking about Zhuo Qingluan? Chapter 22 Yes. Chapter 22 Yes. That's right. My senior sister Zhuo Qingluan. She's awesome. Fairy Muyao's eyes sparkled with pride at her senior sister's fame. She came to Firmament Palace at 8, entered the Spiritual Master list at 9, and topped that list at 10. She entered the Spiritual Grandmaster list at 11 and was ranked 3rd when she turned 12. She's 13 now, and according to our master, my senior sister will very likely top the Spiritual Grandmaster list this year. Why, that's something. She's catching up to us, said Feng Sun approvingly. The newcomer is coming to the fore. I guess we should work harder now, or she'll get ahead of us one day. Fairy Muyao raised her chin proudly. My master says that senior sister Zhuo is the most talented and perceptive pupil she has ever taught. She also says all the time that it was lucky she took senior sister Zhuo in back then, not the other one. The other one? Feng Sun asked curiously. Who's that? Fairy Muyao snorted. Who else? Feng Wu, of course. That genius girl of the imperial capital who turned into the good-for-nothing of northern border city. Xian Yi frowned and gave Fairy Muyao a quick glance. Fairy Muyao chuckled and asked, I didn't grow up in the imperial capital and know little about what happened back then. But aren't you guys all from the imperial capital? Didn't you know Feng Wu then? Of course we did, Feng Sun snapped. Speaking of which, little Feng Wu was so beautiful. You could tell she was going to be a beauty even at that age. Her features were so delicate that she looked like an exquisite jade sculpture. Her skin was so fair and smooth. She was wonderful. I wished I could steal her away and dote on her like a big brother. Feng Wu buried her face in her bowl and ate in silence. She didn't hear anything, she couldn't hear anything. Everyone talked about everyone else and were talked about behind their backs in turn. However, it felt so weird to be the topic of conversation when she was still here. Luckily, she was disguised as this ordinary girl, otherwise, sigh. Feng Wu tried to change the subject. This roasted leg of that crying elk is so delicious. Feng is such an amazing cook. Aren't you going to try some? And stop gossiping about me already. However, they all ignored her and kept on talking about what they remembered of that little Feng Wu. Fairy Muyao was a little disappointed. Resting her chin in her hands, she turned her pretty eyes to Feng Sun. Was Feng Wu that pretty when she was little? Do you think she'd be prettier than me now? Fairy Muyao was very confident in her good looks. As the sacred lady of Firmament Palace, she was known to be second only to Zhuo Qingluan, the goddess of the palace, in appearance. Feng Sun glanced at Fairy Muyao, then arched an eyebrow mischievously. Do you really want to know? Yes. Young lord, please tell me the truth. Fairy Muyao said earnestly. Her bright eyes were wide open as she waited for Feng Sun's compliments. Feng Sun thought, well, as you wish. I don't know if Feng Wu is still as pretty as she used to be, but judging from her good looks back then, you still have a long way to go to even qualify to be her maid, said Feng Sun, shaking his head. He remembered that Feng Wu used to have a young maid who was a little beauty as well. You! Muyao was furious. The rims of her eyes turned red and she almost burst into tears. Feng Sun didn't expect her to cry so easily and looked frightened. Hey, I only told you the truth because you asked for it. I wasn't lying. Ask your cousin if you don't believe me. Xian Yi, say something. Tell her how pretty little Feng Wu was. Wait, Xian II, I remember that you used to compliment her, saying that she was going to be a beauty, didn't you? Feng Wu drew in her breath. How come you people are so gossipy? Those words coming from that poker-faced teenager? That was... Yes? Xian Yi nodded. Chapter 23 Feng Wu the Little Genius. Chapter 23 Feng Wu the Little Genius. Yes? Xian Yi nodded. That shut everyone up instantly. Jun Linyuan went on eating gracefully, but he took the time to give Xian Yi a long look and frowned a little. Fairy Muyao glared at Xian Yi. She wanted to cry, but no tears would come. As if what young Lord Feng said wasn't enough, you, my cousin, are doing this to me as well. Sob. Feng Sun's eyebrows waggled as he felt pleased with himself. See? I told you. Xian II did compliment her. Infuriated, Fairy Muyao ground her teeth and looked the other way. Unexpectedly, she caught Feng Wu's gaze while the latter was watching them in resignation. Muyao immediately decided that Feng Wu was laughing at her. She flared up and glared at Feng Wu. What are you looking at? I may not be as pretty as Feng Wu, but I'm still 1,000, no, 10,000 times better looking than you are. You hag. Gnawing on a bone, Feng Wu watched in resignation as Fairy Muyao vented her rage. Feng Wu was speechless. What had she done now? Feng Sun took pity on Feng Wu, who looked so innocent. He cast a stern look at Fairy Muyao and said, That's a personal attack. Xiaowu may not be as pretty as you are, but she's kind and pure at heart. If you ask me, she's much lovelier than you. Feng Wu was too abashed to meet Feng Sun's eyes. How did he come to the conclusion that she was kind and pure? She was a little wolf in a lamb's skin, ready to steal that immortal spiritual fruit at the first opportunity. Fairy Muyao clenched her fists, her cheeks flaring. Are you suggesting that I'm unkind, impure, and not lovely enough? Feng Sun gave her a half-smile. Would a kind person call a complete stranger hideous? He heard it. He had heard it the first time. Fairy Muyao stared at Feng Sun and went stiff with fright. Driven by her anger, Muyao opened her big eyes wide. So, you brought Feng Wu up on purpose and said she was much more beautiful than me because you wanted to avenge this girl? Was that it? Young Lord Feng, you have no idea what Feng Wu looks like now, do you? Tearing at a tender, juicy piece of roasted leg of crying elk unhurriedly, Feng Sun gave Muyao a devil-may-care smile. Her mother was the most beautiful woman of the Junwu Empire of her time. How much worse can she be? Young lady, if you ask me, stop trying to compare yourself with her. She's way beyond you. You? Muyao fumed. She smacked the table and announced, Fine. No one is going anywhere after we leave here. Let's go to the old Feng family manor. I'd like to see how that good-for-nothing will look standing next to me. Feng Wu was speechless. She now knew what an undeserved catastrophe felt like. Luckily, she was finally no longer the topic of conversation and she could eat her dinner in peace. However, she couldn't be more wrong. Feng Sun looked up at the starry night sky and sighed with emotion. Come to think of it, Feng Wu was so brilliant. Back then, everyone in the imperial capital knew the legends of her, and she broke all the cultivation records there were to break. She was a level 3 spiritual master when she was 4, right? Level 4. Xian Yi, who didn't seem to be paying any attention to Feng Sun's words, corrected the latter immediately. A level 4 spiritual master at 4 years old. We didn't even qualify as spiritual masters when we were 4, Feng Sun said in amazement. Of course, Boss Jun isn't included. He's not as ordinary as the rest of us. Chapter 24, Brother Feng Sun, I don't want to talk to you. Chapter 24, Brother Feng Sun, I don't want to talk to you. Feng Wu rolled her eyes when no one was looking. She was originally a woman of the 21st century, who had woken up in a baby's body in this world. At 3, she accidentally triggered that dragon and phoenix spiritual ring and met her beautiful master. Zhuo Qingyun and the people behind her set Feng Wu up when she was 8 and her true phoenix blood was destroyed. She had been banished to live in the old family manor in northern border city until now, at 13 years old. She had indeed been a genius, as everyone else said, in the 5 years between 3 and 8. There were 9 spiritual master levels, and many got stuck at this cultivation stage for the rest of their lives without breaking through. However, Zhuo Qingluan was able to enter the spiritual grandmaster stage at such a young age and had even made such great progress already. Feng Wu, on the other hand, wasn't even a level 1 spiritual master yet. At that thought, Feng Wu suddenly lost her appetite. You were no match for her back then, Feng Sun teased Xian Yi. I can still recall your sulky face after losing to Feng Wu back then. You would wait for her outside her house with a sword every day and challenge her to a fight, but she was so aloof that she didn't even remember you. The first question she asked was, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" Ha ha. Xian Yi looked at Feng Sun in resignation, then turned his head the other way. That guy in his big mouth. Feng Wu looked at Xian Yi with wide eyes. She said that? Why couldn't she remember any of it at all? But she supposed she could have said that, for she had been so busy back then. Apart from her daily cultivation tasks, she had had so much more to learn. Inscriptions, spiritual formation, carving, painting, music, language, history, geography, and intricate and obscure medical knowledge. Her beautiful master was a perfectionist, and little Feng Wu took classes almost 24/7 with barely any breaks in between. She got up earlier than the birds and went to bed after the pigs went to sleep. She was exhausted at the end of the day and would fall asleep as soon as her head hit the pillow. Thankfully, she had her training as a top-secret agent in her former life, which had tempered her stamina and endurance through countless battles, otherwise she would never have been able to keep up with such a schedule. But she wasn't aloof or haughty at all. She was just very, very busy. Hence, Feng Wu made an attempt to vindicate herself. This Feng Wu you're talking about, could she be that aloof? Maybe she was just too busy to. No, she wasn't, Feng Sun said affirmatively. What else did she have to do apart from cultivate? She just had this deadpan face, and kept her distance from everyone. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. Brother Feng Sun, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Feng Sun loved noise and excitement. He was the type that could liven up a party all by himself. Since Feng Wu wouldn't talk to him, he went back to gossiping with Xian Yi. Xian Yi, you had a crush on Feng Wu back then, didn't you? Or why would you wait outside her door and run after her all the time? Before Xian Yi could deny it, Feng Sun arched his eyebrow, sounding cheerful and confident. Too bad, Feng Sun didn't like you. She was in love with Boss Jun. Feng Wu was sipping her tea, and she spat it out at those words. Cough, cough, cough. Feng Wu thought she was going to cough her lungs out. WTF? Since when was she in love with Jun Linyuan? She had only been 8 years old, for Christ's sake. What did kids of that age know about love? What Feng Sun said was pure slander. Feng Sun took out a white silk handkerchief in a hurry and dried the water on Feng Wu's face for her. He scolded her as he wiped her face. I was talking about Feng Wu, the girl in love with Boss Jun, not you. Why are you being so fidgety? Feng Wu was shouting at the top of her lungs in her head, but I am Feng Wu. Chapter 25. The engagement wasn't off? Chapter 25. The engagement wasn't off? Feng Sun kept on talking as he cleaned Feng Wu up. Feng Wu was swept off her feet by Boss June back then. There was this time when she waited for us outside Imperial College, and when we came out, she inched toward us with this shy gait, handed him an eternity stone, then ran off. Ah! Feng Wu was speechless. It was a misunderstanding. A huge misunderstanding. It was an eternity stone, true, but she had delivered it for Chowga, her BFF. And she had made that clear when she gave him the stone. How come they thought it was from her instead? Had her voice been drowned out by the laughter from Feng Sun and the others? Plus, she neither inched, nor was she shy. She had been practicing that phoenix dance her beautiful master taught her, and her feet had been covered in wounds. She simply wasn't able to walk any faster. Feng Sun laughed as he told the story. Looking down, he saw Feng Wu's clenched fists and knitted eyebrows and was intrigued. Little thing, why do you look so nervous? Are you jealous because you're in love with Boss June as well? Don't worry, Boss June broke off his engagement with Feng Wu and there's nothing between them now. Feng Wu almost choked on her own spit. June Linyuan? Come on, she wouldn't fall in love with that man even if he was the last man on earth. Feng Wu waved her hands hastily. No, of course not. I'm not going to fall in love with your Boss June, never. Thump! Feng Wu was in such a flurry that she waved her hands a little too forcefully. An amber-colored tall glass fell when she swung her arm and she rushed to catch it. However, she hit her forehead hard on the corner of the table and the sharp pain immediately brought tears to her eyes. It all happened so fast that no one had time to react. Feng Sun was speechless. Xian Yi's mouth fell open. And so did Muyao's. June Linyuan looked up, his chiseled face as handsome and inscrutable as ever. He then said in an impassive tone, I didn't. Everyone needed a moment to digest that piece of information. All of a sudden, Feng Sun smacked the table and stared at June Linyuan. Boss June, what did you just say? You didn't? As in, you're still engaged to Feng Wu? June Linyuan nodded. That can't be. Feng Sun's attention was immediately drawn by the subject. How is that possible? Didn't you break off the engagement back then? I didn't sign it. June Linyuan's eyes were as clear and brooding as deep pools and his voice didn't betray any emotion. As always, he gave off this majestic, stately, and detached air. Feng Wu was utterly baffled. He didn't sign the paper to break off their engagement? What was that supposed to mean? So, she was still June Linyuan's fiancée? Shit. No! Feng Wu opened her eyes wide in surprise, and she had to fight back her impulse to go up to June Linyuan, grab him by his collar, and shake him violently for an explanation. Feng Sun was exhilarated. So, you didn't sign it at the last minute? Wow. Feng Sun looked like he had just discovered the new land. He smacked the table again. Boss June, don't tell me that you're secretly in love with Feng Wu. Did you refuse to sign it because of that? Did you? Gosh. How could I miss that? You and Feng Wu. Xian Yi stared at June Linyuan with wide open eyes. So did Fairy Muyao. Fairy Muyao seemed to wake up from a dream and cried out, That's impossible. His Royal Highness can't be in love with Feng Wu. She's useless now. Chapter 26, Because She's Beautiful. Chapter 26, Because She's Beautiful. Because she's beautiful, said Feng Sun. She's useless. Because she's beautiful. Because she's beautiful. Feng Sun nodded at Fairy Muyao, looking very sincere. Fairy Muyao had never felt so defeated at the successive blows she had received today. Feng Wu was exasperated and protested, waving her hands around, No, of course he's not in love with. She had to fight back that last me to stop herself from revealing her true identity. Feng Wu froze on the spot. Whoosh. Everyone's gazes turned from Jun Linyuan to Feng Wu. Feng Sun was speechless. Xian Yi's mouth fell open. Fairy Muyao fell silent. Feng Xiaowu, you say you don't like Boss Jun again? Feng Sun looked shocked. Feng Wu fell forward in despair until her forehead hit the table. She waved at them in resignation. I'm not even here. Go back to whatever you were talking about. All the words in the world weren't enough for her to give a convincing explanation, and she simply gave up. Glaring at Feng Wu, Fairy Muyao snorted inwardly. In your dreams. TCH. However, Feng Sun was too preoccupied to notice Feng Wu anymore. Rushing to Jun Linyuan's side, he asked in great agitation, Boss Jun, you didn't answer my question. Did you refuse to break off the engagement because you like Feng Wu? Did you? Did you? Did you? Ah. Jun Linyuan brushed Feng Sun off, finding the latter distasteful, and frowned. The other way round. The other way round? Feng Sun was as quick-witted as ever. Folding his arms, he snapped his fingers and announced confidently, I see. What Boss Jun means is that seeing how infatuated Feng Wu was with you, you couldn't bring yourself to break her heart. So, that was why you didn't break off the engagement? Who on earth was so infatuated with Jun Linyuan? Feng Wu almost jumped to her feet. However, to Feng Wu's utter disbelief, that born ruler and the majestic crown prince replied with a non-committal He gave a How could he? Feng Wu opened her eyes so wide that her eyeballs could have fallen out. What was that reply supposed to mean? Beside her, Fairy Muyao couldn't take it anymore. Biting her lip, she asked, But why didn't you do it? Feng Wu is useless now. She can't cultivate any more and will remain a mortal woman. She will grow old like they all do, and in a few decades, she'll be all white-haired and wrinkled. Your Royal Highness, she doesn't deserve someone as godlike as you. Those words brought silence to the table. Feng Sun said in a forlorn voice, Feng Wu became Failure Wu when she was only 8, right? What a pity. Feng Wu glared at Feng Sun. Failure Wu? Failure? That was such an awful nickname. Feng Sun had no idea that the girl in question was sitting right across the table and was venting her anger inwardly. He was at a loss at the dirty look Feng Wu gave him. Fairy Muyao smirked. The Feng family pushed their daughter too far until Feng Wu's cultivation went awry. Her true phoenix blood exploded, turning her into a good-for-nothing that can't cultivate anymore. Who else could they blame but Feng Wu herself? She was too greedy. Feng Wu clenched her fists and smirked inwardly. So, that was the rumor the Zhuo family spread. Pushed her too far? Cultivation gone awry? Her greed leading to her true phoenix blood exploding? Chapter 27, Something Came Up. Chapter 27, Something Came Up. Feng Sun actually agreed with her. It was the Feng family's fault. Their greed destroyed the greatest genius they had in generations. What a pity, sigh. Feng Wu took a deep breath. Zhuo Qingluan, not only did you destroy my true phoenix blood, you also put the blame on your victim and spread such vicious rumors about me. Fame and gain, you've taken them both. Good job. Feng Wu clenched her fists again at that thought. Immortal spiritual fruit. She had to get it ASAP. It turned out to be a rather eventful night. Feng Wu was wrapped in the thick blanket Feng gave her and fell fast asleep. Her eyes snapped open all of a sudden. Instinct told her that danger was approaching. Feng Sun was surprised to see Feng Wu awake. You're up. What happened? Feng Wu sat up in her blanket, fully awake. Her eyes were so clear and focused that they reminded him of a sharp sword sliding out of its sheath. Feng Sun was a little baffled. Did he just see a coldness in Feng Xiaowu's eyes that could only be forged after taking many lives and narrowly escaping death in countless battles? No, he had to be mistaken. When he looked again, the feeling was indeed gone. What? Feng Wu asked involuntarily. Feng Sun rubbed his eyes. I was seeing things. I thought I saw this cold, killing intent in your eyes. How could I be so wrong? That's so weird. Feng Sun shifted his gaze from Feng Wu, who had promptly risen to her feet, to Fairy Muyao, who was still sound asleep under her blanket. And Xiaowu is supposed to be the useless one and she the level 5 spiritual master. Feng Sun shook his head. Seeing Feng Wu come out behind Feng Sun, Xian Yi frowned. His cold glance brushed past Feng Wu, then landed on Feng Sun. His voice was emotionless. Be responsible and don't be a burden to the team. Feng Wu knew perfectly well that Xian Yi was talking to her instead of Feng Sun. Deep down, the man considered her a burden to everyone else. Feng Sun rubbed his nose and looked at Feng Wu with his bright eyes. How about you? Feng Wu's black eyes looked so bright in the dark night that they reminded him of the twinkling stars in the sky. She was going to say something when she saw Jun Linyuan dart her a glance. Stomach lurching, Feng Wu's back went stiff and she swallowed back the words. She was going to say that if they were about to be attacked by obsidian wolves, she had some expellant at hand that specially targeted those wolves. They could drive off the pack without breaking a sweat. However, it occurred to her at the last minute that she couldn't expose her real capabilities here, especially not when Jun Linyuan was around. She had to look as useless as they assumed her to be. Only by showing her white feathers and appearing as harmless as a rabbit could she surprise the others when the time was right and take that immortal spiritual fruit from the Crown Prince. There was no other way. At that thought, the piercing look in Feng Wu's eyes disappeared, and she cried out in a panicked voice, What should I do? Am I going to die? I don't want to die. Stay right behind me and don't go anywhere, said Feng Sun earnestly. You have no spiritual essence. Anything here can easily kill you. Feng Wu nodded. Yes, I'll do that. Wait, where is the Crown Prince? Looking around, she saw that the only ones here were her, Feng Sun, Xian Yi, and Fairy Muyao, who still hadn't woken up. Both Jun Linyuan and Feng were nowhere to be found. Feng Sun pulled Feng Wu behind him, the look on his face grave. We're being followed. Chapter 28 Die. Chapter 28 Die. Feng Wu asked curiously, being followed? Someone is actually bold enough to follow the Crown Prince here in Junwu Empire territory? Do they have a death wish or something? Had they forgotten who Jun Linyuan was? As the Crown Prince of the Empire, he was one of the most powerful men in this land and his wrath could set the sky on fire. Who on earth could have targeted him? Have you ever heard of the Dark Court? Feng Sun asked. I know that name. Feng Wu nodded. Are they dregs of the previous dynasty? That's right. The smile disappeared from Feng Sun's face, and there was a gloomy look in his bright eyes. The Dark Court has devoted itself to overthrowing the Junwu Empire and sabotaging our work whenever they get the chance. Somehow, they got wind of our task this time and followed us here in secret. They brought some quite capable hands along as well. Feng Wu's eyes looked so bright in the darkness. Are they stronger than us? Feng Sun said, Our intel says that they're traveling with several powerful elders, together with you Minji, the sacred son of the Dark Court who's as popular as Boss Jun. Look, those wolves were created by these people. The obsidian wolves arrived as he was speaking. Feng Sun was no longer smiling, but had switched to a stern, forbidding expression. Leaping into the air and sweeping his sword across the sky, at least 5 wolf heads flew off, rolled on the ground, and hit Fairy Muyao in the head. Ah! Fairy Muyao woke up with a start and sprang to her feet. Wiping her face, she saw her palms come back covered with blood and she screamed. Ah! That shriek successfully drew the attention of all the wolves. Hence, a group of wolves left the pack and charged ferociously at Fairy Muyao. Right now, both Feng Sun and Xian Yi were fully occupied with the obsidian wolves and couldn't spare any effort to help the two girls. Feng Sun threw a dirty look at Xian Yi when Muyao's ear-splitting shriek ripped through the air. Even Xiaowu didn't make a sound. What is she, a level 5 spiritual master, crying out for? Can't she just run away? Feng Sun snapped. The look on Xian Yi's face was cold and stern as he kept his silence. And you call Xiaowu a burden? If you ask me, that little cousin of yours is the biggest burden of all. As he cut his way through the obsidian wolves, Feng Sun wouldn't stop venting his sarcasm. Xian Yi couldn't contradict him even if he wanted to, for Feng Sun was telling the truth. At that moment, the squad of wolves had almost reached Fairy Muyao. Fairy Muyao looked frightened. She was fine taking on 1 or 2 wolves at a time, but at least 24 wolves were now charging at her. What should she do? She didn't want to die here. Looking up, she spotted Feng Wu. A sinister look flickered in her eyes. Since she didn't want to die herself, that annoying ugly girl would die instead. It would be the greatest honor for that girl to die for a fairy like her. At that thought, Fairy Muyao swiftly turned around and dashed toward Feng Wu. She cried out loudly as she ran, "Help! Help! Help!" Feng Wu saw the look in Muyao's eyes as the latter rushed close. Shit! Exerting the power of Phoenix Dance, Feng Wu swirled and evaded Fairy Muyao's malicious grab when the latter arrived. Fairy Muyao wouldn't have it. Failing to grab Feng Wu, she shoved Feng Wu toward the wolves when they brushed past each other. Die! Chapter 29 Why Didn't They Bite Her? Chapter 29 Why Didn't They Bite Her? However, Fairy Muyao didn't expect what happened next. Just as she pushed Feng Wu out from behind, Feng Wu suddenly reached out with her right hand and grabbed Muyao's wrist. Before Fairy Muyao realized it, Feng Wu turned nimbly on the spot, and with a thump, both girls fell into the pack of wolves, who immediately surrounded them. Although Fairy Muyao had spiritual essence and was a level 5 spiritual master, Feng Wu had taken her by surprise. The trick Feng Wu used was achieved solely through her physical strength. Actually, Feng Wu could throw Fairy Muyao to the wolves, and using the momentum, climb up a tree and get herself to safety. However, she couldn't do that, because Xian Yi's eyes had been following her suspiciously the whole time. Fairy Muyao was filled with hatred and her eyes spat flames of rage as she glared at Feng Wu. How dare that stupid girl plot against her? But before Fairy Muyao could say anything, Feng Wu began to scream. Fairy Muyao, you can't throw me to the wolves just because you can't outrun them. Help! Help! Feng Wu rolled around on the ground in a flurry, her tiny figure looking rather wretched. Fairy Muyao tried to retort, but she had no time to do that, for all the wolves were charging at her now. Fairy Muyao was so angry that she almost had a stroke. Why? She and that ugly girl had fallen into the wolf pack together, but why did the 24 ferocious obsidian wolves with glossy fur target just her? Why were the sharp fangs tearing at her alone? Why? Why? To make it even worse for Muyao, that ugly girl rolled around on the ground, looking all panicky and screaming for help. Help my ass. You're surrounded by wolves all right, but no wolf is attacking you. They're all on me. Fairy Muyao wanted to cry. Why? Feng Wu knew perfectly well why. It was because of that obsidian wolf expellant she carried. Before she fell into the wolves, she had rubbed the expellant all over her arms. It had a smell that repulsed obsidian wolves, and they wouldn't get anywhere close to Feng Wu. But Fairy Muyao knew none of that. She was driven insane by the wolf. Her clothes were in shreds, her legs were scratched, and her disheveled hair made her look like a crazy woman. She wailed as she struggled to fend off the fangs of the obsidian wolves. Why are you all biting me? Why don't you bite her? Why? Sob. By now, Feng Sun and Xian Yi had killed most of the obsidian wolves. Seeing that they weren't getting anywhere, the remaining obsidian wolves fled. "Are you all right?" Feng Sun was amused to see Feng Wu, who was flailing all 4 limbs while covering her eyes with both hands, rolling around on the ground and crying for help. He said grumpily, "Stop shouting. The obsidian wolves are all gone." Only then did Feng Wu open her eyes and sit up, looking pleasantly surprised. "Are we safe now? Are we? Gosh, I'm not dead." Fairy Muyao couldn't even cry now. She was covered with cuts and bruises, her clothes were speckled with blood, and her hair looked like a haystack. Her face had gone blank and she couldn't look any more a sorry state. Chapter 30 She's Lying. Chapter 30 She's Lying. Crouching down, Xian Yi examined his devastated cousin, and even his perpetual poker face cracked a little. Xian Yi didn't know what to say. All of a sudden, Fairy Muyao's glassy eyes moved and she stared right into Xian Yi's eyes. She looked like a zombie coming back to life, and even someone as courageous as Xian Yi jumped at that. "Cousin!" Fairy Muyao grabbed Xian Yi by his robe. "She's lying. She's not as useless as she looks. She has had cultivation practice, and she's not harmless at all. She's a mole. Kill her. Kill her now." Xian Yi was speechless. He was considering the possibility that his cousin was hallucinating from the shock. Only then did Jun Linyuan and Feng show up. Their clothes were tidy and spotless, and they didn't seem to have just walked away from a battle at all, but more like they had just returned from a stroll after dinner. Seeing Jun Linyuan, Muyao pushed Xian Yi away and pounced at the crown prince. Jun Linyuan frowned and moved out of Fairy Muyao's way. On his impeccable face, the look in his piercing black eyes turned as sharp as a blade. Fairy Muyao's momentum sent her falling to the ground face down. Overwhelmed by pain, anger, and grievance, she thumped her fists on the ground and burst into tears. "I'm telling the truth. I really saw her exert martial power. She pushed me into the wolf pack. Look, she fell in with me, but she doesn't even have a scratch on her. The obsidian wolves bit only me. I was the only one they attacked." Sob. At first, no one believed what Fairy Muyao said, but when they turned to look at Feng Wu and saw that she was unscathed. They had both been surrounded by wolves, but compared with Fairy Muyao, who had scratches and bite marks on her body, her limbs, and even her face, Feng Xiaowu wasn't injured at all, and was only covered in grass and dirt. That was too lucky to be true. Xian Yi had been suspicious about Feng Wu from the beginning, and seeing that, he stepped out, grabbed Feng Wu's wrist, and stared at her coldly. "You really are a mole?" Feng Sun moved at the same time. As soon as Xian Yi took Feng Wu's wrist, Feng Sun took the other one. Feng Sun glared at Xian Yi. "What do you think you're doing? Xiaowu doesn't know any cultivation. Your grip is so tight you'll hurt her." Feng Wu was touched and turned to look at Feng Sun involuntarily. In a moment like this, he was still concerned over her well-being, instead of the possibility that she might be a mole. Hadn't she told him that he shouldn't be this nice to her? "Young Lord Feng, stop protecting her. She pushed me to the wolves and she tried to kill me. She's so evil." Fairy Muyao ran up to them and yelled. Feng Wu smiled and turned her bright eyes on Fairy Muyao. "I pushed you to the wolves? Fairy Muyao, there's a witness everywhere, and you should always tell the truth. Those who invert justice will be struck by lightning." Xian Yi kept his cold gaze on Feng Wu and tightened his grip. "Ah!" Feng Wu grunted in pain. Blue veins popped on Feng Sun's forehead, and he was going to lash out when an indifferent voice spoke behind them. "Let go of her." Chapter 31 So Damn Lucky. Chapter 31 So Damn Lucky. "Let go of her." The voice was majestic, detached, and resolute, which evoked a sense of deference in everyone. Before they knew it, everyone turned to the voice. With his chiseled face and clear eyes, the teenager looked poised, elegant and formidable. Boss June. Xian Yi frowned. We can't take Muyao at her word, but her suspicion isn't unfounded. This Xiaowu girl isn't what she claims to be. Feng Sun threw a dirty look at Xian Yi and said again, stressing each word, Boss June has spoken. Let go her. Xian Yi looked grimly at Feng Wu, but didn't dare disobey Jun Linyuan, even if he was the crown prince's childhood friend. Thus, he loosened his grip and let go of Feng Wu's hand. Feng Sun pulled Feng Wu to his side right away and asked anxiously, Are you all right? Does it hurt? Feng Wu's role today was as the innocent, fragile weakling of the team. She might not be a great actress, but after being around her beautiful mother for so many years, she knew exactly what an appealing, harmless White Lotus kind of girl should look like. She put on an award-winning act. The rims of her eyes reddened, but she fought to keep her tears at bay. Her eyes glistened as she stubbornly tried to stop herself from crying. There you go, one ordinary, unyielding, and utterly wronged girl on a roll. Xian Yi only glanced at Feng Wu in passing, but was immediately overwhelmed by guilt. Had he really wronged the girl? Feng Sun's heart went out to Feng Wu and he couldn't stop casting stern looks at Xian Yi. Xian Yi said grumpily, I have every reason to be suspicious. Why did those obsidian wolves only attack Muyao? Was she that damn lucky? I don't buy it. Actually, she was that damn lucky? Jun Linyuan pursed his thin lips. His voice wasn't loud, but there was a confidence in it that wouldn't be challenged. What? Xian Yi stared at Jun Linyuan, unable to utter a word. Jun Linyuan didn't reply, but only nodded at Feng. Feng began to speak, his face as impassive as ever. I can detect the scent of 7 frosty night grass on Miss Feng. I wonder if young Master Xian knows that 7 frosty night grass is the main ingredient of an expellant? Of course Xian Yi didn't know that. Medicine refinement was beyond his ken. Feng went up to them, gestured at the ground that Feng Wu had rolled over repeatedly, and explained in an unhurried tone, when Miss Feng fell, she was fortunate enough to fall on this 7 frosty night grass, so that its sap was rubbed all over her. Obsidian wolves are very sensitive to this scent, which was why they kept their distance from her. Muyao's mouth fell open. Feng, are you saying that Feng Xiaowu isn't a mole, but just got lucky? Yes, said Feng indifferently. I don't believe it. It's just too big a coincidence that 7 frosty night grass happens to grow here and she happened to fall on top of it. No one can be that lucky. I don't believe a word you said. She's a mole and she pushed me to the wolves. Muyao wouldn't admit defeat. Feng Wu darted an inconspicuous look at Muyao. As a matter of fact, she wasn't as lucky as she appeared to be. Feng Wu had come up with a plan when she dragged Muyao into the wolf pack with her. She simply took some 7 frosty night grass from her dragon and phoenix spiritual ring and rolled around on top of it. However, no one but Feng Wu herself knew that. Chapter 32, She'll Come Back. Chapter 32, She'll Come Back. Keeping his cold gaze on Muyao, Feng walked to a spot a short distance away. Feng Wu's stomach lurched. Feng had stopped on the exact spot where she had dragged Muyao into the wolf pack. Feng remained poised. He looked like he could see through everything in the world and nothing could evoke any emotion in him. In an impassive voice, he began to speak. Here we can see 2 sets of footprint. I'll call Miss Mu's footprint 1 and Miss Feng's footprint 2. The 4-foot indents in this line of footprint 1 are deeper than at the heel. Obviously, Miss Mu was dashing forward. Then, please look here at footprint 2. It is evident that Miss Mu charged at Miss Feng and tried to drag her into the wolf pack, but Miss Feng dodged. Miss Mu then tried a second time to push Miss Feng to the wolves. Keeping his eyes on the footprints, Feng described the events in a calm voice, as if he had seen it with his own eyes. Feng Wu's pupils contracted a little as she looked at Feng attentively. She had known all along that Jun Linyuan was someone she should keep her distance from, but little did she know that even his steward was this formidable. She had to be extra careful from now on. Feng Wu clenched her fists when no one was watching. All color had drained from Fairy Muyao's face and lips. She looked like she was going to collapse at any moment. Every word out of Feng's mouth was like a slap to her face, and she could feel the burning pain in her cheeks. Looking up, Fairy Muyao saw Jun Linyuan's nonchalant, stunning face, the undisguised disappointment in her cousin Xian Yi's eyes, Feng Sun's anger, and Feng Wu. Ah! Fairy Muyao snapped. Holding her head in her hands, she screamed, "All right? Feng was right. I tried to throw Feng Xiaowu into the wolf pack on purpose. But I was just probing her. I had my suspicions." "Shut up." Even Xian Yi couldn't stand Fairy Muyao anymore. "Cousin, even you won't believe me now? You'll regret this. You will." After making such a humiliating gaffe in front of the young man she idolized, Fairy Muyao couldn't bring herself to stay here anymore. Her pride simply wouldn't allow it. Burying her face in her hands, she ran away, still howling. Feng Sun darted a look at Xian Yi. "Aren't you going to bring her back?" Xian Yi looked conflicted and frowned. Jun Linyuan, who had always been reticent, spoke at that moment. "She'll come back." Everyone stared at Jun Linyuan in disbelief. Feng Sun rubbed his nose. "I think that if she has any pride at all, she won't show up in front of us for a very long time." Jun Linyuan didn't argue, but only stood there with his hands behind his back and his robe flapping in the wind. He had a well-defined profile and a beautiful face. Standing there, he looked eminently above everyone else. There was something utterly unpredictable about him. It was impossible to tell what his next move would be. Feng Wu couldn't figure out why Jun Linyuan was so sure that Muyao would return to them on her own. She soon knew why. Just when they were ready to move out, a flustered voice rang out in the distance and drew nearer. "Help! Help! Help!" Fairy Muyao was running toward them as fast as she could, followed by a dense horde of obsidian wolves. They numbered at least 100 times more than before. Tens of thousands of wolves closed in on them, and their howls were blood-curdling. Chapter 33 Jun Linyuan demonstrates his prowess. Chapter 33 Jun Linyuan demonstrates his prowess. Strong obsidian wolves appeared one after another in the darkness, their glowing green eyes giving one the creeps. How can there be so many of them? Even Feng Sun jumped at the sight. He had no problem with a pack of hundreds of wolves, but there were at least 10,000 of them. This was going to be a fierce battle. Feng Sun turned around to look at Feng Wu, his expression grave. "This will be much more serious than earlier. Don't wander off and stay behind me, okay?" Feng Wu had never seen such a serious look on Feng Sun's face. Tens of thousands of obsidian wolves. Feng Wu smiled wryly. Her expellant would be good for nothing now. They really were in trouble this time. Xian Yi frowned. "How come there are so many of them? From the looks of it, they're all in a berserk state as well?" Jun Linyuan narrowed his eyes, which flickered dangerously. He acknowledged that with a little All eyes turned to Jun Linyuan. Feng Sun asked involuntarily, "Don't tell me that all these obsidian wolves are controlled by the Dark Court? Is this Yu Minji's work?" A cold glint flashed in Jun Linyuan's ruthless eyes, then he gave another It was really Yu Minji, then? Word on the street is that he can control all beasts. I always thought it was a publicity stunt. He can actually control such a huge pack at a time now. That's just frightening. Feng Sun said in amazement. However, Feng Wu sensed Jun Linyuan darting a condescending look at Feng Sun, pitying the latter's lack of imagination. "So, this legendary Yu Minji has the Wolf King under control, through which he's able to command the entire pack of obsidian wolves?" Feng Wu chimed in. Jun Linyuan darted a glance at Feng Wu. Feng Sun rubbed his palms together in excitement. Yes. That must be it. You're right. Let's go, was all Jun Linyuan said in his deep, resolute voice. Go. Go where? The mountain was packed with obsidian wolves. Feng Wu was bewildered. Thud. Feng Sun's knuckles landed on Feng Wu's smooth forehead, and she covered the spot where she had been hit with one hand. She stared at Feng Sun in confusion. Feng Sun said, Don't worry. After knowing the guy for so many years, I've learned that however unbelievable Boss Jun's words sound, in the end, everything turns out just as he predicted. Let's go. Feng Wu walked next to Feng Sun. Then, she saw something truly amazing. Jun Linyuan stepped forward casually, as if the obsidian wolves weren't there at all. The Wolf King at the front of the pack stared at Jun Linyuan with its cruel scarlet eyes, ready to tear out his throat at any moment. All the other obsidian wolves snarled, but were forced to stumble back at Jun Linyuan's imposing aura. Staring at Jun Linyuan, the wolves had deference and fear written all over their faces. They couldn't for the life of them figure out why their king was forcing them to provoke this human teenager, who was giving them the creeps. They didn't want to die. All of a sudden, the eyes of the Wolf King flickered and the bloodthirsty look in them was replaced by clarity. The Wolf King's howl resonated in the silent night. Aru. Chapter 34, Yuminji. Chapter 34, Yuminji. The pack of obsidian wolves stirred. The next moment, they turned around and fled in every direction. Feng Sun, who had been ready for a bloody battle, was speechless. At the same moment, Yuminji, who was already in Black Ice Valley, felt something rush up his throat before blood trickled out from the corner of his mouth. He Jun Linyuan, I see you've figured out how to counteract my beast-controlling method and turn the spell I cast back on me. The Crown Prince is indeed as formidable as they say. With a straw sticking out of his mouth, Yuminji smirked cockily. A complacent look flickered in his eyes as he turned his gaze to an indistinct dot of light up on the cliff. Too bad you're late, and that immortal spiritual fruit is meant to be mine. At those words, Yuminji grabbed the stone wall with both hands and dashed up the cliff, soon disappearing into the night sky. Meanwhile, Jun Linyuan's team was still hurrying along on their journey in the dark. The more Feng Sun thought about it, the more worried he became. Rushing to Jun Linyuan's side, he asked, Boss Jun, what are we looking at now? Please don't tell me that Yuminji has reached Black Ice Valley already. Jun Linyuan replied in an unwavering tone, Yes. Are you kidding me? Feng Sun nearly jumped into the air. He's there already? Boss, Black Ice Valley is where that immortal spiritual fruit is. Aren't you worried that he'll take the fruit first? How can you stay this calm? He won't. Despite his laconic answer, there was something about Jun Linyuan's tone that couldn't be challenged. How can you be so sure? Feng Sun was a little exasperated. It's Yuminji we're talking about here. He's just as famous as you are and gets in your way whenever he can. He's the sacred son of the Dark Court, for heaven's sake, not some random guy you can just brush aside. Jun Linyuan frowned and cast a stern look at Feng Sun. Feng Sun smacked his forehead. Fine. That's Yuminji, a guy not worthy to be mentioned alongside you and who is a tad inferior to you in his capabilities. But that doesn't change the fact that he's a tough opponent. Feng Wu asked curiously, Is this Yuminji very formidable? Feng Sun turned into a chatterbox at that question. He said grumpily, Yuminji is supported by a bunch of elders that are hopelessly loyal to him, not to mention that the guy is super talented and capable, second to no one but Boss Jun plus. That guy is erratic and unpredictable. He's arrogant and bossy one moment, and flippant the next. You never know which way he'll turn. Worst of all, Yuminji will get in our way whenever Boss Jun tries to do something important. The immortal spiritual fruit this time, for instance, is useless to him, but he just has to sabotage our task because Boss Jun needs it. The guy is abominable. Feng Wu rubbed her chin. Why does it sound to me like your crown prince is being stalked by this Yuminji? You don't say, said Feng Sun sulkily. He just keeps showing up and making a scene wherever he goes. How annoying. Feng Wu rubbed her chin again. Why do I find him a little adorable? No, he's not. Feng Sun knocked Feng Wu's forehead with his knuckles. By the way, if we really run into Yuminji later, run as fast as you can. Why? Feng Wu was bemused. Those amorous eyes of his are known for their mesmerizing and seductive effect. When I say that no lady has been able to resist him, I'm not exaggerating. Where do you think he gained his fame for being as popular as our boss June? It was all thanks to his skill at flirting. So, for the sake of your own safety, run away as far as you can from him, copy that? Feng Sun enjoined. Sure. Feng Wu obviously didn't register any of that in her brain. Shortly afterward, the team reached the perimeter of Black Ice Valley when Chapter 35 Immortal Spiritual Fruit. Chapter 35 Immortal Spiritual Fruit. In Black Ice Valley. Although it was deep into the night, the valley was brightly lit by countless torches, which turned it as bright as during the day. However, there was no one around. The silence was unnerving. Feng Wu scanned the area with her eyes, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Look there. Feng Sun raised his eyebrows and looked pleasantly surprised. Following his finger, they saw a flickering dot of light up on the high cliff. Without a doubt it was Immortal Spiritual Fruit. Xian Yi cried out. The fruit that shines like a star at night. Yes, that's right. Feng Sun was so excited that he almost jumped up. Ha! That spot is where the fruit grows. If we've guessed right, that flash of light is our immortal spiritual fruit. But what's going on here? Xian Yi frowned a little. The place looks ransacked. It must have been quite the battle. At that very moment, Feng Wu's unblinking bright eyes were fixed on that towering cliff and the dot of light on it. They were right. That was exactly where that immortal spiritual fruit was. Feng Wu had kept a close watch on that immortal spiritual fruit for the past few years, for once she obtained it, she would be able to refine the 9 transformation spirit restoration pill, and with the pill, she would be able to resume her cultivation. Resume her cultivation. She would be that genius teenage girl again. The temptation was so great that she could hardly stand still. Eyes shining, she clenched her fists under her long sleeves. The next moment, Feng Wu realized that something wasn't right. Based on her past observations, a formidable, blood-curdling sacred emerald python always hovered around the fruit. All her attempts to get closer to the fruit were rendered futile by the bone-chilling energy the python gave off. There was nothing she could do about it. However, she neither saw the python nor sensed its energy now, which was rather unusual. Jun Linyuan's thin lips moved and he said quietly, "The guy isn't completely useless." What? Feng Sun was bewildered at first, but soon, his eyes lit up. Boss Jun, this is your doing, isn't it? You set Yu Minji up again. That sacred emerald python was lured away by his elders, wasn't it? Jun Linyuan gave another indifferent hum. Feng Sun couldn't help but pity Yu Minji a little in her head. That teenager had fallen into Boss Jun's trap every single time, but he just kept coming back for more. Feng Sun said, "This is strange. If Yu Minji's people have lured that python away, why hasn't he taken the fruit already?" The tiniest smile emerged on Jun Linyuan's charming face, but he didn't say a word. The next second, Jun Linyuan leapt up, stepped on the cliff wall, and swiftly dashed upward. In a matter of seconds, he was a long way off the ground already. Feng Sun watched enviously. He then exchanged looks with Xian Yi and said, "Let's go." After that, both guys kicked the cliff wall with the tips of their feet and they were off like shooting arrows. They were so quick. Feng Wu kept her unblinking gaze on the 3 teenagers, who were getting smaller and smaller in her sight. Her eyes twinkled in excitement and she clenched her fists tight. Immortal spiritual fruit. It was her immortal spiritual fruit. Chapter 36, You've Stepped on Someone. Chapter 36, You've Stepped on Someone. Since that immortal spiritual fruit was within their reach, she wasn't worried at all that June Linyuan would fail to obtain it. However, what did worry her was how to snatch the fruit away from June Linyuan once he had it. Suppressing her excitement, Feng Wu forced her brain to turn. Meanwhile, June Linyuan almost reached the top of the cliff. The cliff was a rather special one, for instead of bare rock, the cliff wall was covered in leafy vines from top to bottom. In the dark, with the help of the rock protrusions on the cliff wall, June Linyuan twirled and turned, nimbly making his way up the cliff. Just before June Linyuan landed, one of the protuberances he stepped on shifted under his weight and let out a cry of pain. However, June Linyuan didn't seem to notice the sound at all. With a leap, he was on the top of the cliff. Feng Sun was right behind June Linyuan and heard the cry. Hence, upon landing, he said to June Linyuan in bewilderment, "I think you stepped on someone back there." "No, I didn't." June Linyuan didn't give it another thought. Right now, all his attention was on the immortal spiritual fruit in front of him. Moonlight poured down through the clouds like water, and an immortal spiritual flower that was as white as a magnolia slowly blossomed under the moon. It was fruiting as they watched. Gleaming and translucent, the immortal spiritual fruit was as flawless as a piece of white jade. Its beauty was breathtaking. All their orifices seemed to open up at the dense spiritual essence the fruit gave off. Around the plant was a long strip of glistening snake skin. That's the skin the sacred emerald python shed. Judging from its color, the python has completed all 9 transformations already. It must be terrifyingly powerful now. If we had to fight it head-on, Boss June, what chance do we stand? Feng Sun had forgotten all about the person June Linyuan had stepped on, and all he could think of now was this splendid python skin. June Linyuan's nice straight eyebrows creased a little. "We'd be just as severely injured as it." Patting his chest, Feng Sun rejoiced. "Ha! Luckily, Boss June tricked you Minji into luring that python away, or even if we could defeat it, it'd be at great cost. Sigh, I wonder how pissed you Minji will be after he realizes that we've stolen his prize." "You Ming?" June Linyuan frowned, looking confused. Feng Sun said in resignation, "You Minji, the guy's name is You Minji. Come on, Boss June, You Minji thinks of you as his #1 enemy, and he's been trying to get your attention whenever he has a chance. You don't even remember his name?" June Linyuan was still frowning. "That won't be necessary." Feng Sun couldn't help but say a silent prayer for You Minji. Poor guy. If he finds out that the person he's deemed as his archenemy can't even remember his full name, and wasn't planning to, for that matter, how mad would he be? Sigh, it's good that he's not here, or he'd explode. June Linyuan forgot about the subject right away. With a flick of his fair, slender fingers, the immortal spiritual fruit automatically flew toward the white jade box in his hand. Once the fruit was inside, the lid closed on its own and the box locked with a click. June Linyuan turned around swiftly, his robe flapping in the wind. His foot pushed down on the cliff wall, and with the momentum, he jumped off. On his way down, he stepped on that round black protuberance again, but paid no attention to it whatsoever. Chapter 37, The Miserable Teenager. Chapter 37, The Miserable Teenager. At the same time, Feng Wu and Fairy Muyao were left behind on the ground. As for Feng, needless to say, he went wherever June Linyuan went. Watching June Linyuan turn in the air as he descended the cliff, Feng Wu's gaze instantly shifted to the white jade box in his hand. Immortal spiritual fruit. Immortal spiritual fruit. The fruit that would enable her to cultivate again. Ah! Feng Wu was ecstatic. The excitement made her tremble from head to toe. Fearing that the look in her eyes would give her away, Feng Wu lowered her head involuntarily, trying to hide her true feelings from Jun Linyuan. However, Feng Sun was as caring as ever. Seeing the shivering Feng Wu, he asked in concern, "Why are you shaking all over? Are you not feeling well? Is the wind here too chilly?" Feng Wu was trying her best to not be noticed. However, with Feng Sun's questions, all eyes were on her again. Fairy Muyao snapped, "Chilly night wind? If you ask me, she's shaking in excitement because of the immortal spiritual fruit. I told you already, she's a mole." Feng Sun glared at her. Instead of scolding Muyao, he turned to warn Xian Yi, "Normally, I won't hit a woman, but that doesn't include the really annoying ones." Xian Yi glanced at Feng Sun in resignation. He couldn't for the life of him figure out what was so special about this Feng Xiaowu that the young lord of Northern Feng Mansion wouldn't stop standing up for her. At that thought, Xian Yi patted Fairy Muyao on the shoulder and warned her, "Did you hear that? Do you understand what it means? Keep it in mind." He was obviously shirking his responsibility, and was telling Fairy Muyao that he wouldn't interfere if Feng Sun decided to teach her a lesson. Fairy Muyao wanted to cry, but no tears would come. Why wouldn't her elder cousin look out for her like the others? However, Jun Linyuan's eyes flickered at that moment. He didn't seem to hear their bickering at all, but only said quietly, "The 9 transformation sacred emerald python is coming back. Time to move out." Hence, they quickly left, led by Jun Linyuan. Shortly after the team departed, up on the cliff, a head finally moved under the thick growth of vines. "Russell." The teenager let go and rolled down the cliff. "Russell." Luckily, the cliff wall from that point down was covered in vines and leaves. He slid all the way down until he landed on a pile of withered grass. "Bah!" A teenager with the most seductively charming face scrambled out of the haystack. Bits of straws stuck to him from top to bottom, especially his hair. Because he had rolled down the slope, his hair looked like a chicken coop, which was unkempt and covered in grass. The teenager that should look stunningly beautiful but had become the most miserable sight was none other than the Yuminji Feng Sun had been talking about a moment ago. This had to be the worst day of young Mr. Yu's life. He did have the upper hand at first. He reached Black Ice Valley before Jun Linyuan did. That was because he had used special means to control the pack of obsidian wolves as he tried to stall Jun Linyuan by using the tens of thousands of wolves. However, little did Yuminji expect that when he was almost at the top of the cliff and 10 meters away from the immortal spiritual fruit, that 8 transformation sacred emerald python finally succeeded in its cultivation and obtained its 9 transformation immortal form. A beam of sinister cold light shot out from the python's forehead. Whoosh! Chapter 38 I'm Yuminji. Chapter 38 I'm Yuminji. As the cold ray of light shone on him, Yuminji realized in despair that he couldn't move. Jun Linyuan hadn't arrived, and he was 1 step away from the immortal spiritual fruit. But he had gotten stuck here. In that moment, Yuminji had never felt so frustrated. How could this happen? What had he ever done to deserve this? However, not only was he unable to move, he couldn't even make a sound. It was the most miserable sight. What was worse, the python discovered his hiding place. The python slithered toward him with a body as thick as a tree trunk until its red 2-pronged tongue touched his ear. Fortunately, the 3 elders he had brought reacted quickly enough. Leaping out, they distracted the python and lured it away from the cliff. Would things turn around for Yuminji from there on? In point of fact, the teenager who was excellent beyond comparison would turn into the most unfortunate guy whenever Jun Linyuan was involved. Jun Linyuan ran up the cliff by finding his footing along the way, and that last protuberance he had stepped on was Yuminji's head. And he stepped on it twice. To Yuminji's further exasperation, Jun Linyuan couldn't remember his name. Jun Linyuan couldn't even remember his name? It was such a hard blow that Yu Minji nearly had a heart attack. I'm Yu Minji. Ah! When he was finally able to move again, Yu Minji shouted at the top of his lungs in the direction that Jun Linyuan and the others had left in. However, the only reply he received was the sound of wind rustling through the branches. You stepped on my head? Ah! Yu Minji almost gave himself a stroke. Not only didn't Jun Linyuan admit that he had stepped on another person, he couldn't even pronounce Yu Minji's full name. That was ridiculous. Yu Minji didn't care all that much about some immortal spiritual fruit. The only reason he had shown up here was to make life harder for Jun Linyuan. Because Jun Linyuan's goal was to obtain the fruit, Yu Minji made it his goal to stop Jun Linyuan from getting it. You've taken it. I didn't see that coming. Jun Linyuan, do you think I'll just let you leave? In your dreams. Yu Minji clenched his fist. You'll soon learn what I'm capable of. Just then, he sensed a fluctuation of spiritual essence coming his way. Yu Minji was elated. His elders were back. It was indeed the 3 elders, who were followed by that injured python. Yu Minji smirked. Jun Linyuan, do you think you'll take the immortal spiritual fruit away just like that? Just wait and see. After that, Yu Minji led the python in Jun Linyuan's direction. Somewhere ahead of Yu Minji, the team was pressing forward. Even Fairy Muyao, the most finicky of them all, had stopped talking and was focused on hurrying along. Just then, a furious snarl rang out behind them. Thieves! Give me back my immortal spiritual fruit! The 9 transformations sacred emerald python stuck out its 2-pronged tongue, which flashed through the air like a red whip. It slashed down at Feng Wu. Feng Sun didn't notice it at first, but when he realized who the python was attacking, it was too late. A chill ran down Feng Wu's spine as death caught her by the elbow. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.